Chapter 232. Hakushin Jinkuan didn't mind perfected Lord Tianlan's slightly sarcastic tone. Those who could cultivate to the highest realm in the world and stand at the pinnacle of the human race's martial strength had all tempered their will to be as tough as steel in the long process of cultivation. However, confidence and pride didn't equate to stupidity and blindness. The person in front of him was his junior brother and also a talented perfected lord of the divine transformation realm. Bai Chen definitely didn't think that Tianlan was someone who could be easily dealt with. Furthermore, the current situation was obviously the result of Tianlan's sudden intrusion into Winter Peak after careful planning. Putting everything else aside, just the fact that his second disciple, Zhuo Xian, had betrayed him showed how dangerous the situation was. Bai Chen even began to worry about the situation below Winter Peak. Today was the day the sect council would be held. According to the plan, the eldest disciple, Idle Month, should be in Tiankuan Peak's Jinyang Hall having a meeting with the various elites in the sect. During the most important night meeting, he might still be waiting for her to go over and hold the fort. However, Tianlan suddenly came and blocked him on the Winter Peak. Hakushin Jinkuan could easily imagine that there must be some conspiracy behind this. However, at this moment, he couldn't quickly contact his eldest disciple. Therefore, the best and most effective way was to quickly settle the matter in front of him. In fact, the fight at the foot of the mountain wasn't a big deal. It was nothing more than some intrigue and murder. Even if it was murder, how many people could they kill? Could they turn the world upside down? What mattered was that junior brother Tianlan in front of him was the only person who could truly threaten him. As long as he could win here, what couldn't he clean up? True Lord Bai Chen's mind spun to this point, but it only took a moment for him to clearly understand the importance of this chaotic situation. His gaze became even colder as he stared at the bald and burly man below and said coldly, "Junior brother, on account of Master's warning before his death, I can spare you this time. As long as you hand over that traitorous disciple, Zhuo Xian, to me to deal with and retreat from Winter Peak, I'll treat it as if today's matter never happened. Otherwise..." At this point, Hakushin Jinkuan sneered and glanced at the transparent thorns that filled the sky with cold light. "Don't forget, this is Winter Peak, the cave abode that I've managed for many years. It won't be difficult for me to take your life." Perfected Lord Tianlan looked up at the figure wrapped in the snowstorm and didn't speak immediately. Instead, he stared thoughtfully for a moment. Then, he suddenly sensed something and turned to look at Zhuo Xian under the ice wall. Zhuo Xian's face was as pale as a piece of paper. His chest rose and fell and his breathing seemed to become rapid. Perfected Lord Tianlan laughed heartily and waved his hand at him. Then, he pointed at the figure in the snowstorm and said, "Don't be afraid, don't be afraid. He's just scaring people." The snowstorm suddenly became urgent and the whistling sound became louder. It seemed that his words had angered Hakushin Jinkuan in the snowstorm. However, perfected Lord Tianlan didn't seem to care. He squinted slightly and looked at Hakushin Jinkuan for a moment. He smiled and said, "Senior brother, I wasn't so sure at first. But after hearing what you said, I probably know that the black dragon saliva is not easy to bear. It's not so easy to detoxify it by spitting out 2 mouthfuls of blood, right?" Hakushin Jinkuan sneered and didn't say anything else. He controlled the snowstorm to descend slowly and the sharp spikes in the sky began to tremble slightly. It was as though the final battle had arrived and the next moment, thousands of arrows were going to shoot and poke perfected Lord Tianlan into a sieve. Perfected Lord Tianlan seemed to have sensed Hakushin Jinkuan's determination. He nodded and the smile on his face disappeared. Ding! It was unknown which crystal-clear icicle suddenly vibrated and let out a sound. All of a sudden, this pleasing sound with a hint of coldness rang out. Countless icicles began to move, sealing off all of perfected Lord Tianlan's escape routes. Seeing that a huge battle was about to break out, Zhuo Xian, who was watching from the side, subconsciously held his breath. However, at that moment, perfected Lord Tianlan suddenly stomped his foot. That foot stepped into the snowy ground, passing through the snowflakes and landing on the solid ground. In an instant, it was as though the mountains were shaking and the earth was cracking. A huge hole suddenly appeared where perfected Lord Tianlan was standing. Then, perfected Lord Tianlan's burly figure fell into the hole and disappeared in an instant. In mid-air, Hakushin Jinkuan let out a furious roar. The snowstorm roared and countless transparent sharp spikes came crashing down. In the blink of an eye, the snowy ground was riddled with holes. Not only the snowy ground, even the soil layer was pierced by these powerful ice spikes. However, perfected Lord Tianlan had actually disappeared. After a while, the winter peak suddenly shook again. Under the snowstorm where Hakushin Jinkuan was, a large cloud of snowflakes exploded and a figure soared into the sky. With a deafening whistle, he charged into the snowstorm from below. Soon after, hundreds of sharp ice spikes rushed out from the ground and chased after perfected Lord Tianlan's body as if they were hunting for his life. They also charged into the snowstorm. Like the rumbling of thunder, all kinds of strange sounds came from the snowstorm. After a while, lightning suddenly appeared and shuttled through the snowstorm. At the same time, the wind's speed became faster and faster, so much so that people could not see what was happening in the snowstorm. Suddenly, a loud roar exploded from the depths of the snowstorm. The lightning suddenly became more than 10 times brighter and rushed in all directions. Countless snowflakes and ice blocks also exploded, destroying everything in the vicinity of the snowstorm. The mountain walls collapsed and the snowdrifts collapsed. Countless white snow fell with a loud roar like an avalanche. Zhuo Xian had long noticed that something was wrong and hid far away. Even so, he was still forced into a sorry state by the surging and wild power. For a moment, he was shocked. Perhaps this was the true power of a divine transformation stage perfected Lord? They could seize the power of heaven and earth, break the mysteries of creation, and turn into gods with divine power that could destroy heaven and earth. Snow fell and the heavens and earth moaned. After a while, when the fierce snowstorm gradually calmed down, the snowstorm that had been wreaking havoc in the air had disappeared at some point. The two divine transformation stage perfected monarchs had already landed on the snowy ground from midair. However, the snowy ground was already riddled with holes and was uneven. There were deep pits and big holes everywhere. Only the two of them stood facing each other more than 20 feet away from each other. They did not seem to be in a good condition. Perfected Lord Tianlan's sleeves were torn in several places. His face was also a little pale and some of his wounds were bleeding. Hakushin Jinkuan's condition was worse. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth and turned black. The two of them stood facing each other. After a while, Hakushin Jinkuan suddenly said, "You're indeed more talented than me. We're 20 years apart in age, but you've actually caught up to me in terms of cultivation." Unexpectedly, perfected Lord Tianlan did not mean to be modest. He just nodded and said, "You're right." Hakushin Jinkuan sneered. He took a deep breath and wiped the black blood from the corner of his mouth. He said coldly, "Although your cultivation is high and you plotted against me with poison, I'm naturally not your match if we were outside. But you insisted on fighting on my winter peak. You can't blame me for borrowing the power of Snow Wind Spirit Mountain. So in the end, you're still the loser." Tianlan frowned and seemed to think about it seriously. Then, he nodded and said, "You're also right about this." Hakushin Jinkuan's face turned cold. He did not seem to be happy or excited at all. On the contrary, his pupils contracted and a trace of fear and worry flashed across his eyes. At their level of deification, their mastery of the spiritual power of heaven and earth, Tao Dharma and divine sense had long been meticulous and exquisite, and their judgment of the situation was rarely wrong. However, even though Tianlan admitted that in the end, Hakushin Jinkuan, who borrowed the spiritual power of the cave mansion on Spirited Mountain, would be more advantageous, Tianlan himself did not have the slightest intention to retreat. He was even smiling there with calmness, as if he had nothing to fear. At that moment, Hakushin Jinkuan's mind was like electricity. He almost subconsciously wondered if there was someone else besides Zhuo Xian who had betrayed him and arranged some extremely sinister means for him. But very soon, he was shocked to find that his mind was a little chaotic at that moment. He had clearly gained the upper hand with the power of the cave mansion on Spirited Mountain, but why was his mind restless? What was the answer to this question? Perfected Lord Tianlan stared at him and suddenly said, "Senior brother, after Master's death, the two of us have been fighting openly and secretly for decades. Until today, I suddenly realized that you are actually old." Hakushin Jinkuan sneered and did not speak. Instead, he took a deep breath. The endless wind and snow once again gathered around him, and the powerful snowstorm seemed to show a little pattern again. No matter how glib Tianlan was, as long as he was on this winter peak, with the help of the spiritual power of heaven and earth mountains, he would never lose. Then why did he have to talk nonsense? Tianlan shook his head slightly and looked at Hakushin Jinkuan with a trace of pity in his eyes. It was a kind of condescending manner, a special look of a victor to a loser. In Hakushin Jinkuan's life, no one had ever dared to look at him like this. Except now. Hakushin Jinkuan sneered. He raised his hand and the snowstorm surged again. However, at this moment, his eyes suddenly froze and he suddenly looked up. He looked past Perfected Lord Tianlan's figure and looked at the mist behind him. The thick mist had unknowingly spread to the entire winter peak. At this moment, the mist also seemed to surge rapidly. A huge shadow that was comparable to the entire winter peak slowly appeared behind Perfected Lord Tianlan's composed figure. There was a sudden clap of thunder in the sky. Lightning tore the sky apart. Under the light, a terrifying black claw that was even twice the size of Perfected Lord Tianlan's body reached out from the thick mist. With a boom, it grabbed the land of the mountain. The wind and snow in the world were filled with desolation. Then, the entire sky suddenly darkened. Chapter 233. The silhouette in the thick fog looked as big as a mountain. As it swayed, streams of black gas soared into the sky. Following that, the huge black claw with protruding joints suddenly grabbed onto the ground of the cliff of Winter Peak. The sharp and terrifying claws instantly pierced through the incomparably hard rocks, firmly grabbing onto it without letting go. After a moment, under the gaze of everyone on Winter Peak, that huge black claw suddenly contracted, as if it had used all its strength. Its bones and muscles bulged, and then an even bigger shadow rose from the bottom of Winter Peak. The dense fog tumbled like boiling water. It seemed to be extremely agitated, or perhaps it was filled with fear. In this dark night, a huge head could be vaguely seen, slowly approaching from the dense fog. There was a deep and thunderous breathing sound, even suppressing the sound of the snowstorm. Two huge eyes gradually appeared in the dense fog. There seemed to be a flame burning fiercely within it, and that flame was shockingly as deep as ink. Dark flames. Boundless dense fog was emitted from the ground. It had already completely surrounded the four odd peaks between the clouds in the sky, tightly wrapping around the most important forbidden area of the Kunlun party. In this pitch-black night, looking from afar, there was actually not the slightest hint of abnormality. Only at a certain moment in the midst of the violent storm, lightning, and thunder, when the lightning that suddenly tore apart the night sky and landed on this dense fog, could some shadows be seen. However, for some unknown reason, there should have been an earth-shattering battle in the dense fog, but at this moment, not the slightest movement could be heard from within the fog. Not a single trace. The place beyond the clouds in the sky was still submerged by the storm. The heavy rain was still falling, and the cold wind was still blowing, covering the entire Kunlun mountain range in the darkness of the night. No one knew when this night would be over. In the side hall behind the Xingyang Hall of Heavenly Kun Peak, almost all the enlightened Yuanying who came to this place had already arrived. In the middle of the hall, there were 2 main chairs and 2 large rosewood chairs, 10 on the left and 9 on the right, were arranged in a straight line. Today, the Kunlun party was the top cultivation sect in the divine central continent. In addition to the 2 perfected lords of soul formation who commanded the masses, there were 19 top Yuanying perfected masters in the sect. Among them, there were 15 in Kuinji, and 4 in Tieji, led by Masato Kihara. But recently, Dongfang Tao had just broken through and became the 20th Yuanying Jinren of the Kunlun party, so there was an additional red sandalwood chair in this side hall. At this moment, there were already many people sitting on the chairs. After Dongfang Tao arrived, he very consciously sat in the last seat according to seniority. From his point of view, he saw Perfected Idol Month sitting upright and still on the main seat in front of him, looking dignified. Slightly behind him was another large chair, which was still empty at the moment. As everyone knew, that seat belonged to Hakushin Jinkun. 2 rows of perfected Yuaniing great perfected masters were seated below him. If this lineup was casually seen by others, it would be truly frightening. This was the embodiment of the powerful strength of the current Kunlun party and the foundation of the Kunlun sect. To the left of Daoist Master Idol Moon sat Daoist Master Thousand Lanterns. Below him were Daoist Master Pearl, Daoist Master Guanyang, and the others. To the right of Daoist Master Idol Moon, the first seat was empty. Further down, Dongfang Tao could also see that several Yuaniing perfected masters who were close to Perfected Idol Month, including several Yuaniing perfected masters who had appeared in the Xingyang Hall during the day earlier, were also sitting there. When they sensed Dongfang Tao's gaze on them, they also smiled and nodded at him. From the looks of it, the atmosphere in the hall seemed to be rather relaxed. Dongfang Tao thought indifferently. Occasionally, when his gaze swept past the area in front of him, he would notice some strange details. Perfected Idol Month's expression was dignified and serious, but his eyes would glance at the nearest empty seat every now and then. There was a faint trace of anxiety in the depths of his eyes. Perfected Thousand Lanterns and the others on the opposite side of the empty seat remained silent. Their faces were calm and indifferent, but they would occasionally reveal a trace of a smile with a hint of coldness and mockery. It was Dongfang Tao's first time coming to this side hall. After a moment of silence, he lowered his voice and quietly asked a perfected Yuaniing perfected master who was sitting next to him. After receiving the answer, he nodded and thanked him. When he raised his head again to look at the empty seat, his gaze was somewhat different. That empty seat originally belonged to Heavenly Soldier Hall's Dukanjinren. It was already so late. Why was it that Dukanjinren, the sect leader's most hardcore, most resolute, and at the same time most unlikely partner to be absent, had still not come here? Where did he go? Other than Dukanjinren, there were several other empty chairs in this hall. However, most of the reasons were known to everyone. For example, there was a perfected Yuaniing perfected master from Tieji who was in closed-door training in order to extend his lifespan. If he failed, he would probably die of old age. There were also some who were in closed-door training in order to practice some kind of extremely difficult Dao technique. This kind of closed-door training could not be interrupted, so they did not come here. But basically, those who could come here and those who should have come here were almost all here. Right now, in this side hall, there were only 2 people who should have come but had not yet. One was Dukanjinren, and the other was even more influential. It was the owner of the chair next to Perfected Idol Month, Hakushin Jinkun. These 2 were undoubtedly Perfected Idol Month's strongest supporters in the Kunlun party, especially his teacher, Hakushin Jinkun, who was an important person. The impact of these 2's absence was obvious. Even just by looking at them, it made people feel that Perfected Idol Month's side had suddenly become much emptier, giving off a strange feeling of weakness. Perfected Idol Month was indifferent to this, as if he did not feel anything. He was still sitting quietly, as if his patience at this moment was endless, ready to wait for these 2 people to come. Perfected Idol Month was the sect master. If he showed that he was willing to continue waiting, most people would not say anything against it. Although the identity of a Daoist master of Yuaniing stage is precious, each of their time is extremely precious, but tonight is obviously a different night, and to be able to cultivate to this point, how can there be a stupid idiot? Although there is no sign tonight, the atmosphere has been a bit different from previous years. Perfected Xian Deng's faction was silent and did not move, while those from Perfected Idol Month's faction began to frown one after another, their faces revealing a hint of worry. There was also a portion of Perfected Yuaniing who was usually neutral, who also felt that something was wrong. After observing the situation for a while, they all looked at their noses at their hearts, and their mouths were shut. I don't care if it's wind or rain, I'll just sit and watch. Dongfang Tao was a newcomer who had just arrived at this realm. In the past, he had actually more or less heard of some undercurrents surging in the sect and stories of open and secret strife. However, he was not a direct descendant of the lineage of ancestor Tian Hong, so his position in the Kunlun sect had always been somewhat marginalized. It was precisely because of this that Dongfang Tao showed the attitude of relying on Perfected Idol Month on this day, and received Perfected Idol Month's praise and acceptance. No matter what, because Perfected Yuanying was a powerful and precious battle force, it was necessary to win over them. However, after arriving at this side hall, Dongfang Tao suddenly realized that his choice did not seem to be as stable as Mount Tai as he had originally thought. The hostility in this sect towards Perfected Idol Month's faction was much stronger than he had expected. Dongfang Tao was a little puzzled about this, because his many years of experience had long since explained one problem. As long as Hakushin Jinkuan was around, Perfected Idol Month's position was unshakable, and Perfected Idol Month's faction's power was unshakable. But why did those people seem to be a little aggressive? Why did they dare to do this? Why did they seem not too afraid? As Dongfang Tao was pondering, a voice suddenly sounded in the hall that had been silent for a long time. It was Perfected Qian Dang, who was sitting on the left side of the main seat, slowly standing up. His gaze was calm as he looked around at the crowd. In that instant, Dongfang Tao's heart suddenly trembled, as if he had sensed something, and he actually became a little nervous. Perfected Idol Month, who was sitting on the main seat, also suddenly raised her head. Her gaze was cold, and a sharp light seemed to shoot out from her eyes as she stared at Perfected Qian Dang. However, Perfected Qian Dang didn't seem to notice this. He didn't even carefully look at Perfected Idol Month. Instead, his gaze swept across the faces of all the Yuanying spiritual masters present. After a moment, he suddenly smiled and said, "It's getting late. It's already past the time for our little meeting, right?" At that moment, the entire hall was silent. It was unknown how many nascent soul-perfected masters were sitting still, their faces expressionless. Dongfang Tao, however, took a deep breath, as if he was preparing himself to welcome the sudden storm. Storm. No one spoke, and no one responded to Perfected Qian Dang. The atmosphere in the hall was subtle and strange. However, Perfected Qian Dang didn't seem to mind at all. After looking around, he smiled and continued, "Therefore, I feel that we should begin now. Everyone here is a Yuanying spiritual master, and everyone's time is precious. Am I right, Senior Brother Sect Master?" His last sentence was said as he turned his head to look at Perfected Idol Month. At that moment, the atmosphere in the hall was so cold and quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Perfected Idol Month slowly stood up and stared at Perfected Qian Dang. After a moment, she said in a deep voice, "There are still a few who haven't arrived yet. It won't be too late to wait." Perfected Qian Dang shook his head and said, "Senior Brother Sect Master, forgive me for speaking bluntly. We've waited for too long. Those who haven't arrived yet won't come. There's no need to waste any more time." A series of gasps could be vaguely heard from the surrounding nascent souls. All of them looked over with complicated expressions. Perfected Idol Month narrowed her eyes and looked coldly at Perfected Qian Dang. She said in a cold voice, "Junior Brother Qian Dang, do you mean that you don't even want to wait for my master, Hakushin Jinkuan?" As soon as these words came out, the surrounding people's breathing seemed to stop. Everyone's gaze fell on Perfected Qian Dang. Chapter 234. The heavy rain did not stop, the dense forest was pitch black, one could not even see one's fingers if one stretched out one's hand. Right now even the dense foliage above their heads could not block the seemingly endless water flow. Everywhere like a broken dam, large waves of water flowed down from the top of the trees. The two figures hidden in the darkness, after the initial shock, quickly quietened down. This forest was so dark that they could not even see each other's faces clearly, also could not see the expression on the person beside them. After an unknown period of time, Lu Chen lowered his voice and said, "The pattern on the back of the tree bark, was it drawn by you?" White Lotus's body shook slightly, seemed surprised again, after a moment of hesitation, said, "No." This time it was Lu Chen who was stunned, and before he could continue to question, White Lotus had already said, "That pattern was not drawn by you." Lu Chen was speechless, looked up at the blurry and petite figure in front of him. At this moment, He felt that he could not see White Lotus's face clearly. Everything about this young girl seemed to be more and more mysterious and strange. It was also not me. Lu Chen quickly denied, took a deep breath and said, "Then why are you here?" White Lotus instead asked, "I also wanted to ask you this question. That pattern is obviously an extremely rare secret pattern in the evil sect. Outsiders are not even able to know about it. How did you know about it, and why are you here?" Lu Chen did not speak. White Lotus also very quickly quietened down. Both of their bodies hibernating in the darkness suddenly moved back a little at the same time, distancing themselves from each other. Lu Chen turned his head, glanced at the big tree in the forest. After a moment of silent contemplation, he made a decision in his heart. Even though White Lotus looked sincere, even though she was only a child, but this girl's words could not be trusted. To coincidentally come here at this night, it was impossible to say that it had nothing to do with the evil sect. This girl must have some great secret on her. Just when he had made up his mind and prepared to move, suddenly his body shook violently, almost fell down, and then in that darkness, black flames suddenly ignited in his eyes. A cold murderous intent uncontrollably rose up. White Lotus almost instantly sensed this biting cold murderous intent. With a cold snort, took 2 steps back, facing Lu Chen with full vigilance. But Lu Chen did not make a move. Instead, with a trace of bewilderment, turned his head, looked into the depths of the darkness. That was the depths of Kunlun Mountain, the legendary place where the sky and clouds were. Just now, he suddenly felt an extremely familiar aura coming from that direction, directly resonating with the black fire hidden in the deepest part of his body, causing the black fire in his body to instantly rise, almost unable to be suppressed. The black flames swayed in the distance in the dark forest, as if there was an extremely strong but from the same source, attracting this black flames. Between the sky and clouds, the winter peak was shrouded in fog. An incomparably powerful aura seeped out of the thick fog. A figure as huge as a mountain was faintly discernible in the fog. Gradually, a huge head approached the cliff on the winter peak. Its true appearance was gradually revealed from the dense fog. It was a huge dragon head, completely black, with long and tough dragon whiskers swaying in the wind, like 2 long black whips. Snow-white fangs faintly appeared in the dragon's mouth, emitting a cold glint. The most terrifying thing was that the pair of huge dragon eyes didn't have pupils. Instead, they were burning with a strange black flame. It looked like a demon that had suddenly leaped out from the netherworld. It slowly rose in front of the winter peak and appeared in front of everyone on the winter peak in a horrifying manner. The huge and frightening dragon eyes looked down from above. The place where it appeared was right behind True Lord Tianlan, and at that moment, the dragon's head could even be said to be right above True Lord Tianlan's head. As long as it lowered its head slightly, it could swallow True Lord Tianlan, who looked extremely small in comparison, in one gulp. However, True Lord Tianlan did not seem to be on guard at all. He still stood there calmly, his wide sleeves fluttering in the wind. At this moment, both he and the unimaginably terrifying dragon that had suddenly appeared were looking at the person on the snow-covered ground in front of them, Hakushin Jinkuan. Hakushin Jinkuan's expression suddenly changed the moment the black figure appeared. His usually calm face showed a rare expression of inconceivable astonishment. Then, all kinds of expressions intertwined on his face, complicated and incomprehensible. Even his body faintly trembled. It was not fear, but rage. He withdrew his gaze from the terrifying black dragon and stared at Tianlan. He gritted his teeth and said in a hoarse voice, How did you do it? How dare you do this?" True Lord Tianlan's expression did not change, and he looked calm as if he had always had a clear conscience. He turned a deaf ear to Hakushin Jinkuan's questions. The black dragon's head above his head swayed slightly, and a dull sound that sounded like it was tearing through the air sounded. It was as if the dragon's power was so powerful that even the slightest movement would cause a chain reaction. It was truly unimaginable how powerful the black dragon would be if it were to completely rage and attack. Upon seeing that Tianlan did not reply, Hakushin Jinkuan seemed to become even more furious. However, just as he was about to flare up again, something even stranger happened. The black dragon's head, which was high up in the sky, suddenly stretched forward. The black flames in the dragon's eyes burned as if they were reflecting Bai Chen's figure. Immediately after, the dragon's mouth opened, and a deep, thunderous voice suddenly came from the snowstorm. It was the black dragon speaking in human language. He's smarter than you. Hakushin Jinkuan suddenly raised his head and looked at the black dragon with a pale face. Then, he laughed bitterly and said to true Lord Tianlan, "You're audacious, reckless, and rebellious. You've gone far beyond what Master and I warned you about back then. Now that things have come to this, you're actually arrogant enough to let this monster out. Aren't you afraid of being punished by the heavens?" When he said the last few words, Hakushin Jinkuan's voice was like thunder. Every word rumbled as if he wanted to shout angrily to wake up true Lord Tianlan in his eyes. However, Tianlan frowned slightly and said calmly, "This bewildering fog formation has already surrounded the sky. No matter how loudly you shout, it won't be heard." Hakushin Jinkuan's expression was solemn. Suddenly, his expression turned cold as he said, "I've lived for a long time and have enjoyed all kinds of honor and glory. It's nothing even if I die here today. But I just want to ask you one thing, junior brother. Why are you acting so recklessly without any regard for anything else?" He shook his head in pain and pointed at his chest. "Could it be that you've done so many things just to fight with me and kill me?" True Lord Tianlan's expression was as calm as water. No changes could be seen in his heart. Even when Hakushin Jinkuan questioned him sternly, he did not reveal any expression of guilt, regret, or fear. He just stood there calmly and finally smiled. "Senior brother, you're old. You won't understand me," he said indifferently. "No one in this world will understand what I want to do. I don't expect you to understand me either. In life, a good man should do what he wants. Even if the sky falls and the earth shatters, he should still look down on everyone and do as he pleases." Tianlan didn't say these words out loud, but Bai Chen could tell from his expression and eyes that he was serious. They had been brothers for so many years. No one in this world would understand this junior brother better than him. If there was someone, it would probably be their master, ancestor Tian Hong, who had already passed away. Hakushin Jinkuan did not say anything else. After taking a deep breath, the anger on his face quickly dissipated. Wind and snow appeared behind him and gradually condensed into a white snowstorm. The pride and power of a divine transformation stage true lord would never end so easily. The withered old man straightened his back and looked coldly at the burly bald man in front of him as well as the even more terrifying black dragon. He suddenly sneered and said proudly, "Do you think that releasing the black dragon and plotting against me will make me bow down to you?" The black fire in the black dragon's huge eyes flickered and seemed to burn brightly. However, true Lord Tianlan, who was below the dragon's head, stared at Hakushin Jinkuan for a moment and suddenly shook his head. "Senior brother, you're afraid." Hakushin Jinkuan was furious and shouted, "Nonsense. I have the protection of the mountain spirit on this winter peak today. Although that evildoer is ferocious, he has been suppressed for thousands of years. How can he have any combat power or divine ability? Come, let's fight to the death. It's still unknown who will emerge victorious." True Lord Tianlan smiled and slowly waved one of his arms. The thick fog floating behind him suddenly retreated and even the huge dragon's head looked down at him. An incomparably tyrannical power slowly emanated from his body. It was pure yang and as warm as the sun. At first, there was a faint golden light. Then, the light grew brighter and brighter like the rising sun with thousands of golden rays. The endless wind and snow melted and retreated in front of this golden light. He was like a god in the golden light and a blazing yang qi gushed out, making it hard for people to look at him directly. Hakushin Jinkuan's expression changed drastically. His pupils constricted and he said bitterly, "Positive yang art. You've actually mastered it." In the golden light, a scorching yang qi rose, forming a sharp contrast with the icy wind and snow on Hakushin Jinkuan's side. Within the light, true Lord Tianlan's deep voice sounded indifferently. "Master has long said that I'm much more talented than you in terms of cultivation." Right after he said that, the golden light shone brightly and pounced towards Hakushin Jinkuin. Hakushin Jinkuin roared furiously and the wind and snow howled as well. The two perfected lords finally began their final battle in the deep fog of the night. Chapter 235. The light of the rising sun shone brightly. Everywhere it passed, not only did the ice and snow melt, even the rocks and soil under the white snow cracked. A brilliant aura seemed to carry a trace of a domineering aura that was above all things as it rushed over unstoppably. Looking at this golden pillar of light, Hakushin Jinkuin's expression was unusually grim. He took a step back and the surrounding snow and wind immediately stirred up, turning into a blizzard to meet it. The blazing sun and the blizzard, one hot and one cold, one bright and one dark, one yang and one yin, like the two extremes of heaven and earth, like water and fire, collided in an instant. At the very beginning, the two completely different rays of light were locked in a stalemate in midair, constantly melting, dissolving, and constantly surging up. The surrounding space began to distort intensely, and even strange rainbow-colored lights began to appear in the scorching sun, wind, and snow, as well as ear-piercing screeches. After a while, the blizzard began to recede and the blazing sun gradually became more dazzling, pressing forward step by step. Black flames flickered in the eyes of the black dragon in the sky, but it was impossible to tell what it was feeling. Instead, Zhuxian, who had been hiding in a corner after being clearly frightened by the appearance of the black dragon, came to his senses at this moment and revealed a hint of joy on his face. Hakushin Jinkuin's expression changed slightly. Then, with a soft cry, he took a few steps back and leaned his back against an ice wall. In an instant, there was a sudden ka-ka-ka-ka sound and the ice on the mountain wall cracked and fell. White smoke surged out of the mountain rock and seeped into Hakushin Jinkuin's body. As the white smoke entered his body, Hakushin Jinkuin's eyes shone brightly. The blizzard howled wildly and actually rolled back, pushing back the previously unstoppable radiance of the rising sun. Streaks of ice and snow condensed on the ground and in the air, as if the temperature in the air had instantly dropped to an extremely low point. Even the snowflakes had turned into ice cubes, and the blizzard that filled the sky was turning into hail. The white frost was unstoppable, suppressing the scorching light along the way and approaching Perfected Lord Tianlan. Perfected Lord Tianlan's expression was indifferent, as if he was not too surprised or angry by the instant reversal of the situation. He merely stretched out his other hand and pressed it in front of him, drawing a circle with his other hand. Strong pure yang qi overflowed from his palm and directly formed a fire shield in front of him. The white frost pressed forward but was once again blocked in front of the fire shield and could not advance any further. Even so, Hakushin Jinkuin had the upper hand. He had been paying attention to the huge black dragon all this while. However, the black dragon did not move at all from the beginning to the end. Regardless of whether Tianlan had the upper hand or reversed the situation and fell into a disadvantageous position, the black dragon had no intention of attacking. In the Kunlun sect, only Bai Chen and Tianlan knew the secret of the underground palace under the forbidden area. Apart from Tianlan, there was practically no one who knew more about this terrifying monster than Perfected Lord Bai Chen. Apart from Tianlan, almost no one knew more about this terrifying monster than Hakushin Jinkuin. He knew that this monster should not have woken up. It should have been trapped in that dark place, never to rise again. It had been sealed in the darkness for 5,000 years. Would it really be as terrifying as it was back then when it suddenly woke up? At least for now, it seemed that this black dragon was just an empty shell that only had the looks of it. Hakushin Jinkuin's spirits were lifted. If that was really the case, the situation that he originally thought was certain defeat and death today actually had a chance to turn around. Although junior brother Tianlan was indeed extremely powerful, attacking on this winter peak was his biggest mistake. He could even force the demonic dragon back into the underground palace after killing Tianlan. As these thoughts raced through his mind, Hakushin Jinkuin had already thought of many things. However, although Perfected Lord Tianlan was temporarily at a disadvantage, he relied on the fire shield in front of him to defend himself. No matter how Hakushin Jinkuin urged his Taoist skills and magic powers, the frost and snow that could freeze ordinary people to death countless times still could not break through the fire shield's defense and could not advance any further. The Zhengyang tactic was indeed the world's best magical Taoist skill. It was upright and pure, with a faint aura of the way of the king. It became stronger the stronger it was, and its defense was incomparably tight. However, such an extraordinary magical skill was obtained by junior brother Tianlan. Hakushin Jinkuan seemed to suddenly think of something. His expression turned ugly. He stared at perfected Lord Tianlan with a murderous look in his eyes. Suddenly, he let out a long roar and flew into the air. With a shake of his arms, it was as if infinite spiritual power suddenly jumped on the entire winter peak, causing a deafening roar. Countless white smoke floated out from the tall winter peak, wisps and wisps, swam towards Hakushin Jinkuan in the air. Following the gathering of the white smoke, the entire winter peak seemed to have come alive. It seemed to have become one with the skinny Hakushin Jinkuan in the air, breathing together, vibrating together. Right now, the mountain was the man was the mountain. Hakushin Jinkuan was like the incarnation of the mountain god, looking down at Tianlan. Suddenly he laughed loudly, raised his hand and chopped down. At that moment, there seemed to be an illusion in the night sky. The winter peak turned into an incomparably huge giant, slapped down with his palm, wanting to crush the ant under his palm. But perfected Lord Tianlan still did not have much expression on his face. He was still desperately supporting the fire shield, resisting little by little Hakushin Jinkuan's terrifying and crazy attack. Just when the outcome was about to be decided, suddenly, in the depths of the mist, a huge and terrifying shadow appeared. With an indescribable speed, it flew over. It was a huge black claw. It was the black dragon's second claw. The black dragon's claw tore through the endless wind and snow, piercing straight into the snowstorm like the palm of a giant. Before anyone could react, there was a muffled bang. With a muffled grunt, Hakushin Jinkuan was sent flying by the claw. He somersaulted a few times in the air, then crashed heavily into the snow with a poof. Half of his body even pierced into the snow. At the same time, the peerlessly powerful black dragon that had just launched a successful sneak attack slowly retracted its claw. Then, its whiskers undulated as it said calmly, "I heard that you thought I wasn't powerful just now." The black dragon sneered and even flicked its huge claw. Then, it lowered its head and said to perfected Lord Tianlan, "How was it?" Because Hakushin Jinkuan had been sent flying, perfected Lord Tianlan, who had just been suppressed by the mountain range's spirit chi, finally heaved a sigh of relief. Just then, he heard the black dragon's question. Perfected Lord Tianlan glanced at the black dragon and sneered. "Just a so-so." Black flames flashed in the black dragon's eyes, but it did not say anything, nor did it do anything harmful to perfected Lord Tianlan. Instead, it slowly raised its head and said, "Kun Yuanzi and Tai Luo are not good people. They are unwilling to tell their descendants anything. They probably forgot to tell you that the one in the underground palace is a petty dragon." Perfected Lord Tianlan chuckled. "I understand now." The black flames in the black dragon's eyes flickered. It turned its head and looked in Hakushin Jinkuan's direction again. By now, Hakushin Jinkuan had somewhat regained consciousness and slowly stood up from the snow. However, after receiving that heavy blow, Hakushin Jinkuan's condition was terrible. Not only was his clothes in disarray, blood could be seen everywhere from his wounds and between his nose and mouth. He looked extremely wretched. However, before he could regain his composure, a whistling sound suddenly rang out from the sky and a huge black claw smashed down. On the ground in front of him, a dazzling, scorching radiance once again roused itself. This time, it was even more intense than before as it struck down towards him. Tianlan and the black dragon had no intention of giving Hakushin Jinkuan any chance to catch his breath. Seeing that the soul-chasing killing move was right in front of him, Hakushin Jinkuan suddenly roared angrily. His clothes instantly tore apart and all the ice and snow on his hands, feet and body rose into the air, blocking the two monsters' powerful strength. However, the enemy he was facing was too powerful. Or rather, it could be said that not only were they powerful, they were also exceptionally cunning, decisive and determined. The black dragon's giant claws kept smashing at the snowstorm. Every time its claws landed, a large piece of snow and ice would be shaken away. On the other side, Lord Tianlan was silently activating the positive yang tactic with all his might. With a terrifying power that could melt hard iron, he corroded the snowstorm one after another. Hakushin Jinkuan tried his best to resist, but as time went on, it was no longer a long-term solution. Seeing that he was being pressured by the two terrifying forces and had to absorb the terrifying amount of white smoke, he began to tremble at some point in time. After that, he suddenly heard a loud bang. Bai Chen's body suddenly flew backward, and she slammed heavily into the stone wall the next moment. Immediately, ice shards danced in the air, and shattered snowflakes fell from the sky with a hint of desolation. The outcome had been decided. Hakushin Jinkuan was bleeding from his 7 orifices. He was severely injured, but even so, his will seemed to be as firm as steel. He slowly stood up. He opened his blood-stained eyes, panting and laughing bitterly. Suddenly, a hint of madness flashed across his face. With a backhand slap, he directly pounced on the mountain wall with his flesh and blood. The white smoke frantically surged into his body, but Hakushin Jinkuan did not stand up again. He only looked up at the sky and laughed maniacally. He roared, "You're delusional enough to want my immortal cave abode? Dream on." Boom! A strange sound came from the winter peak. Perfected Lord Tianlan suddenly raised his head and glanced at the peak of the mountain. His expression instantly became abnormally ugly. The huge mountain was no longer affected by the snowstorm, but everything on the mountain seemed to have shattered at this moment. Rocks of various sizes kept falling from the mountain. However, the rumbling thunder did not come from the clouds in the sky. Instead, it came from within the winter peak. Hakushin Jinkuan laughed maniacally. "You're still coveting my treasures? Dream on, junior brother. What I will give you is only a collapsed ruin." He roared furiously. All of a sudden, Bai Chen's entire body swelled up and kept expanding. When he reached a certain size, his flesh and blood suddenly exploded, turning into countless splatters of blood. At the same time, the entire winter peak shook violently. Immediately after, a large amount of dust rose into the sky. More and more rocks fell from the mountain. The ground began to crack, and the entire mountain began to collapse. One of the peerless peaks in the sky actually collapsed and fell to the ground today. Chapter 236. A cry that seemed to have come from ancient times reverberated between the heavens and the earth, causing all living creatures to tremble. It was a huge roar that burst forth from the depths of the huge winter peak when it collapsed. At the same time, countless strong rays of light shot out from the mountain, rushing towards the boundless world of darkness in all directions. It was a spiritual light that was condensed from pure and powerful spiritual power. It pierced through all obstacles. At this moment, even the layers of thick fog could not stop the powerful force that erupted at the final moment of the Spirit Mountain's destruction. For a moment, the light was so dazzling that it reached the vault of heaven, illuminating half of the night sky. Large chunks of boulders and rock strata were constantly breaking and collapsing. The entire winter peak was slowly falling, followed by a terrifying storm of dust. The towering Kunlun mountain range, which stretched for thousands of miles, seemed to be trembling non-stop at this moment. The earth also seemed to be wailing. After a moment, the collapse of the winter peak became faster and faster. The smoke and dust grew larger and higher. Just as the floating mountain was about to be completely submerged by the smoke and dust, dozens of dazzling spiritual lights suddenly converged into a scorching, dazzling, and huge pillar of light that flickered and shot straight into the sky. In an instant, the wind blew away the clouds, and the sky changed color. All the dark clouds retreated in front of this pillar of light. Countless gusts of wind and clouds turned into a huge whirlpool that spun rapidly in the air. Darkness and light intertwined, flashing with silver lightning that tore apart the night sky. Then, accompanied by an earth-shattering noise, a wave of light surged in all directions like a raging wave. All the dark clouds were scattered, and the wind and rain suddenly stopped. In the deep and gloomy night, in this originally stormy night, the wind and rain suddenly stopped. Then, a rare yet strangely enchanting scene appeared in the middle of the night. A bright moonlight sprinkled down from the vault of heaven. In the pitch-black night sky, a full moon hung above the 9 heavens. It was full and perfect, dazzling, cold, and peerless, and radiated light in all directions. It was as if everything in this world had lost its color. On the night of the full moon, this full moon finally appeared above the vault of heaven. As soon as the full moon appeared, the dense fog seemed to be suddenly stimulated. It suddenly shrank and began to shrink back into the ground. Perfected Lord Tianlan, who had already flown into the air, stood in the void with his hands behind his back. A strong gust of wind blew past him, causing his loose robes to flutter loudly. He looked like an immortal. Beneath his feet was the ruins of the winter peak amidst a sea of dust. The majestic peak seemed to have turned into the tomb of a deity transformation stage perfected cultivator, sacrificing his body to protect him. Tianlan was not angry about this. His expression was unexpectedly calm as he silently stared at the cold moon in the sky. It was said that when one was at the peak, they would feel lonely and cold. Nobody knew how perfected Lord Tianlan felt at that moment. The huge black dragon in the dense fog had retreated and disappeared at some point. It seemed that it did not like such a strong and bright moonlight. Its huge body had also disappeared into the darkness without a sound. Zhuoxian, who was a little below perfected Lord Tianlan, also flew into the air. He looked at the destroyed winter peak with a complicated expression. Finally, he seemed to sigh. Then, with a respectful expression, he lowered his head slightly towards perfected Lord Tianlan and waited patiently. Just like how he had been patient when he was under perfected Lord Baichen all these years, he had shown sufficient sincerity and submission. In fact, he was even more patient than before. Because the situation was no longer the same as before. In Kunlun, there was no other deity transformation stage perfected cultivator who could compete with the one in front of him. That night, almost every place in Kunlun was shocked by this sudden scene. Everyone, whether they were insiders or not, was shaken to the core. When the earth began to shake, everyone was frightened. When the loud noise resounded through the heavens and earth, everyone felt that they were in danger. In the end, when the wind and rain suddenly stopped and the moonlight shone down, everyone was dumbfounded. In the Xingyang Hall of Mount Tianquan, the 10 or so Yuanying perfected cultivators who stood at the peak of the human cultivation world were all standing in front of the windows and doorways with different emotions. They looked at the terrifying scene of the winter peak falling after the dense fog in the distance dispersed. No one said anything, or perhaps no one knew what to say or what to say. Since ancient times, it seemed that something that would never change had been destroyed in front of their eyes. Therefore, when the cold moonlight shone on them again and shone into the side hall, every Yuanying perfected cultivator seemed to feel a chill. Perfected Master Idle Month was dumbfounded. His face was filled with astonishment and horror. His usual calmness had completely vanished at this moment. Such an earth-shattering event was right in front of them. The mountain peak that symbolized the supreme power of Kunlun had suddenly collapsed in front of them. Who could remain calm? Suddenly, perfected Master Idle Month came to his senses. He immediately stood up and roared, "Quick! Let's go to the winter peak to save the people." There was a commotion in the hall. For a moment, nearly half of the nascent soul perfected masters took a step forward. But at this moment, suddenly, there was a slightly cold, abnormally calm and even somewhat grim voice that reverberated in the side hall. "Wait!" Everyone was shocked. They turned around and saw that the person who spoke was perfected Master Qian Deng, who was seated below perfected Master Idle Month. In the midst of the chaos, this great perfected master, who held a high position in the Kunlun party, had unexpectedly returned to his seat. He sat steadily, calmly, as if he was an old tree that had taken root, not moving an inch. There was not the slightest trace of shock on his face at this moment. His face was calm as he slowly opened his mouth and said, senior brothers and junior brothers, I think we should start this small meeting. As for those who haven't arrived yet, there's no need to wait any longer." As soon as these words came out, the crowd suddenly burst into an uproar. Even though each and every one of the Yuanine perfected masters were well-mannered, their faces changed at this moment. They looked at perfected master Qian Dang in horror. "You!" Perfected master Idle Month was filled with anger. He pointed at perfected master Qian Dang and was so angry that he couldn't speak for a moment. Even his fingers seemed to be trembling. At this time, someone beside him also came back to his senses and immediately rebuked perfected master Qian Dang for not seeing the big picture. Perfected master Qian Dang didn't defend himself. He waited for the surrounding people to quiet down a little before he calmly said, "Martial Uncle Tianlan will be here in a while. When that time comes, it's up to you to decide what to do and what to do next." After saying this, he closed his eyes and no longer spoke. The surrounding hall instantly fell into a deathly silence. Perfected Master Idle Month's face was ashen. His body slightly trembled and a trace of despair finally appeared in his eyes. The cold moonlight sprinkled on the hall's floor, like frost and snow. The speed at which the weather changed was simply inconceivable on this night. A moment ago, it was still raining cats and dogs, and in the next moment, the clouds suddenly parted and the rain dispersed, revealing a bright moon hanging high in the sky. It truly caught one off guard. In the dense forest, from the darkness where one couldn't even see their own fingers in front of them to the sudden disappearance of the water flow and the sprinkling of moonlight, it only took a moment. In the moonlight, Lu Chen and White Lotus suddenly saw each other. They were both taken aback and took a step back. Lu Chen looked up and saw an unusually bright round moon hanging in the sky. He was extremely shocked, but what shocked him even more was that in the depths of Kunlun Mountain, the mysterious power that resonated with the black fire in his body had actually reached an unimaginable level of intensity. White Lotus suddenly cried out in alarm and took 2 steps back. Then she pointed at Lu Chen and said in surprise, You, what's wrong with your eyes? Why is there a black fire burning?" Lu Chen was shocked. This black fire was his most meticulously guarded secret. It could be said that in this world, other than the mute black dog, almost no one had seen or knew about this black fire. At this moment, under the stimulation and attraction of that strange power, he actually couldn't control the power in his body for a moment. The black fire surged up and suddenly appeared in his eyes. Revealing the black fire in his eyes, such a strange appearance, looked like a ghost. Obviously, it was not a supernatural power that could be possessed by the Kunlun party. At that moment, thoughts turned in Lu Chen's mind. The murderous intent on his body fluctuated silently. But at this moment, White Lotus's expression changed slightly. Suddenly, her body shook and she looked into the distance. She saw the huge change that seemed like the sky was falling and the earth was splitting. She saw the scene of the winter peak falling and collapsing. She seemed to be stunned for a moment. Then, she let out a scream and shouted, "Teacher!" Before her voice died away, her whole body shot out like lightning and rushed in the direction of the collapsed winter peak. Her body was so fast that after a few turns in the forest, she was about to disappear from his line of sight. When Lu Chen saw her body move, his face darkened. He subconsciously took a step forward, as if he wanted to make a move. At that moment, a cold wind suddenly blew in the forest. Drops of moisture and water splashed everywhere. A cold light flashed in the eyes of White Lotus, who was in the middle of running, and she seemed to look in his direction. A faint light was faintly discernible in the palm of her hand. In Lu Chen's eyes, the black fire burned fiercely. The moment the two of them brushed past each other, they both seemed to hold their breaths and did not move. It was as if they were overflowing with killing intent, but in the end, they slowly suppressed it. In that inexplicable moment, the two of them separated in the blink of an eye. White Lotus flew away and did not look back. Lu Chen watched the young girl's back disappear into the darkness of the night. Then, he slowly turned around and looked at the earth-shattering change under the bright moonlight in the distance. His expression was complicated. After an unknown amount of time, he raised his head to look at the bright moon in the horizon. Suddenly, he turned around and walked outside. There was a low sigh from his mouth, as if a question of doubt was left in this dark forest. "Why didn't you come?" Chapter 237. Kunlun Mountain. Outside the Fragrance Garden's guest room, Exian stood under the eaves, looking at the bright moon in the sky. Her pretty face was filled with astonishment. It could be said that she was dumbstruck. Not long ago, she was still looking at the heavy rain and wind outside, with some hidden bitterness in her heart. In the end, in the blink of an eye, the rain stopped and the dark clouds dispersed, revealing the bright moon hanging high in the sky. She had lived for more than 10 years and had never seen such a strange phenomenon. For a moment, she felt that her brain couldn't wrap around it. After looking at it for a moment, suddenly, she heard a cry from the guest room behind her. It was Sumo crying out, and his voice carried a sense of extreme pain. Exian was shocked and quickly turned around to look from the windowsill. She saw that on the bed in the guest room, Sumo's eyes were still closed, but the muscles on his face were twisted, as if he had fallen into a terrible nightmare. His body kept twisting on the bed, his legs kicking randomly, his hands tightly hugging his head, and his mouth was shouting nonsense that no one could understand. Waves of painful cries in the middle of the night really made one's hair stand on end. Exian didn't know what was going on, but that person was after all entrusted to her care by Su Qingjun, so she couldn't just watch and ignore him. So, Exian hurriedly ran to the door, pushed it open and ran in. She came to the bed and pressed down hard on Sumo, at the same time calling out his name, hoping that she could wake up Sumo from his nightmare. But Sumo seemed to be deep in a nightmare. No matter how Exian shouted, he didn't seem to hear it. He just desperately hugged his head and twisted his body, crying and shouting something, and finally even began to tear and scratch his body. Exian was shocked and quickly reached out to press down on Sumo's hand, but Sumo's strength seemed to be much stronger than usual in this kind of dream. There were a few times when Exian almost couldn't hold him down, but fortunately Sumo's consciousness wasn't clear, and he didn't deliberately hurt Exian. After repeatedly struggling for a long time, Sumo's pain seemed to slowly subside. His cries then calmed down, and his expression seemed to be more comfortable, no longer twisted in pain. At this moment, Exian was so tired that her forehead was full of sweat. Seeing Sumo like this, she really felt relieved. She straightened up and let out a long breath, wiping the sweat off her forehead. She looked at Sumo again, only to see that the man still hadn't opened his eyes, lying on the bed as if he had fallen asleep again. Exian unhappily curled her lips and muttered, "So troublesome." As she said that, she casually pulled the quilt over and covered him. She looked around again, and after feeling that there was nothing else, she walked out of the door and came to the corridor outside the house. Because of the sudden appearance of the bright moon, and on this full moon night, the moonlight was unusually bright. As if it was daytime, the night seemed to be even brighter than before. Exian looked at the moonlight, and then looked in the direction of the clouds in the sky. Her expression became a little worried, and she whispered to herself, "Such a big thing happened. Even if Sister Su and the others are on the way back, they must have rushed to Dongfeng to help. Really, how could such a thing happen?" Pa! Just as she was talking to herself, a sudden crisp sound came from behind her, startling Exian. She turned around and saw that the two windows of the guest room seemed to have been blown shut by the wind. Exian frowned and snorted. Suddenly, she felt a little cold, but she didn't think too much about it. It was probably because the night was too cold. She stretched out her hand to tighten the lapels of her clothes, but she suddenly remembered that long ago in the land of confusion, when Lu Chen brought her and Atsu to travel through the barren mountains and wild rivers. A faint warmth flashed through her heart, and a trace of a smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. She smiled so sweetly, but she completely didn't notice that there was suddenly a shadow quietly surging up behind her, pouncing towards her back. A strange phenomenon suddenly occurred on Kunlun Mountain. The torrential rain instantly dissipated, and a bright moon appeared in the sky. Such a strange phenomenon did not only occur on the mountain. Even Kunwa City at the foot of the mountain was affected for a moment. However, because they were too far away from the mountain, the people in Kunwa City couldn't see the shocking scene of Dong Feng collapsing. Even so, it was already shocking enough. The two people with the highest status among the demon cult of the three realms hiding in Kunwa City were undoubtedly Fan Tui and Chen He. At this moment, they were standing on the rooftop of their houses and looking at the dark Kunlun mountain in the distance. They had shocked expressions on their faces. Under the night sky, Kunlun mountain appeared unusually mysterious. Even though they couldn't see the scene of Dongfeng collapsing in the dense fog zone, the huge pillar of light that shot into the sky was still too eye-catching. It was impossible for them not to see it. Fan Tui muttered, "What exactly happened on this mountain? Why is there such a strange phenomenon?" Chen He shook his head and said, "I don't know. This is also the first time I've seen such a shocking phenomenon in my life." Fan Tui's expression suddenly changed. He said to Chen He, "Could it be that the mysterious brother in the Kunlun party has done something shocking?" Chen He was stunned for a moment. A strange expression appeared on his face. He wanted to deny it, but after thinking about it carefully, he didn't dare to deny it so recklessly. In the end, he could only let out a bitter laugh and said, "I really don't dare to make wild guesses about this. However, something big must have happened on the mountain that we don't know about." After a moment of silence, Fan Tui suddenly clasped his hands together and said, "Such a shocking phenomenon must be extraordinary. If a treasure has appeared, it must be a rare treasure or an ancient divine weapon. If someone has mastered a technique and displayed a strange phenomenon, it must be a divine technique or a divine weapon. No matter what, we can't ignore it. I'll immediately mobilize people to rush here and order our spies on the mountain to investigate and see what exactly happened to the Kunlun party." Chen He thought for a moment and said, "That's fine too." After saying that, he seemed to have sensed something and turned his head to look around. Under the night sky, he saw that on the roofs and walls of many houses in Kunwa City, there were some indistinct figures standing on high places. They were all looking in the direction of the Kunlun mountain range. Clearly, they were also alarmed by the strange phenomenon that had happened not long ago. In a place even further away from Kunwa City, on a nameless mountain peak in the wilderness, the long and narrow slope at the top of the mountain was littered with the corpses of demonic beasts. Blood flowed everywhere, and flesh was badly mutilated. It was a terrifying scene that resembled the purgatory of the underworld. At the highest point of the mountain peak, on top of a large rock, this most primitive, most barbaric, and most undisguised life and death battle, which was beyond the line of sight of humans, had also reached its final moment. The black dog had bitterly held on until the very last moment. It had blocked off all the greedy demonic beasts that coveted its flesh and blood. It had kicked and bitten to death every obstacle that blocked its path. When it finally reached the highest point of the mountain peak, the sky was raging with a storm. The moon on the night of the full moon that it had been looking forward to the most was nowhere to be seen. Fate was like an evil hand, tightly clutching the black dog's throat, making it unable to breathe, making it groan in pain, making it struggle madly, making it feel like success was within reach, but it seemed like it was about to fall short of success at the last moment. No one could endure such painful torture. It was the same for dogs. The black dog angrily and even madly roared at the pitch-black rain, but it was of no use. As the last of its strength gradually disappeared in the cold wind and rain, the two demonic beasts below, who had been waiting until the very last moment with terrifying patience and astonishing strength, finally began to slowly walk forward. The greedy aura could no longer be suppressed, and the sound of salivating could be heard. Atsu had lost all its strength, and even the blood on its body seemed to be about to run dry. It could only fall to the ground, no longer looking at the ferocious demonic beasts that were closing in on it. Instead, it stared blankly at the dark sky, not even making a sound. Just like that, it silently waited for the arrival of death. The only eye of the black dog was shining with a lonely green light. Perhaps at this moment, it was still thinking about Lu Chen. Perhaps it was still thinking about how wonderful it would be to be able to stay by his side. A scarlet tongue and gleaming fangs drew close to Atu with heavy panting. Atu struggled for a while, but still fell to the ground. Everything seemed to be destined. Until, in the night sky, in the boundless darkness, suddenly, a ray of light fell. A ray of bright moonlight. The dark clouds dispersed, the wind and rain stopped, and the bright moon leaped out from behind the dark clouds, hanging high in the night sky. The cold and clear moonlight sprinkled down quietly. Whether it was Atsu or the ferocious demonic beasts, they all looked up at the sky in horror. But after a moment, suddenly, a dull and strange sound came from the black dog. It was a kind of cracked sound, like the sound of bones rubbing against each other. Under the moonlight, it was so clear that it was a little scary. Atsu suddenly raised its head, and the green flame in its eyes gradually brightened. The greedy demonic beasts, who were close at hand, suddenly began to tremble slightly. They felt a strong aura that they had never felt before, suddenly emanating from the seemingly dying black dog in front of them. The cold night wind blew, and all things crawled. The black dog's body made strange sounds one after another, as if all the bones in its body had been broken, and then reconnected themselves. The aura was like that of a king, looking down on the world, with no one in his eyes. The black dog slowly stood up. The bright moon in the sky sprinkled a beam of light, shining right on its body, wrapping it in the moonlight, and shining spots of light rose up. All the wounds on its body suddenly began to heal at a speed visible to the naked eye. Its muscles bulged and contracted, and its body seemed to be expanding rapidly. In the blink of an eye, it had grown to the size of a lion or tiger. Atsu's spirit was quickly recovering, and it even glanced coldly at the two demonic beasts that retreated. With two wails, the demonic beasts fled, leaving behind a mess of blood on the ground. Atsu seemed to be disdainful, not caring at all. It stood at the highest point of the mountain, looking up at the sky. Suddenly, it raised its head to the moon, and let out a long and mournful howl. The sound shook the wilderness and echoed between heaven and earth. Awoo. Chapter 238. Lu Chen left the dense forest, feeling a little tired. No matter who it was, even if he was once a top-notch shadow in the dark world, had experienced the harshest environments and encounters, and had practiced some strange techniques that ordinary people could not imagine, as long as he was human, hiding in the dark soil for 2 days would not be an easy thing to do. At this time, the bright moon hung high in the sky, and the night suddenly became clear. Lu Chen's clothes were very dirty because of the things that happened in the dense forest, and it was even more obvious under the moonlight. However, this was not a difficult thing for him. In a remote corner not far from the forest, he took out the new clothes that he had prepared earlier and put them on. He looked like a new person, and even his complexion looked much better. Then, he walked into the distance, his eyes occasionally looking in the direction of the sky and clouds in the depths of Kunlun Mountain. The huge pillar of light that shot into the sky was too shocking, and there was nothing that could block it anymore. Looking at the spectacular scene of the huge winter peak collapsing and being engulfed by the huge smoke and dust, Lu Chen was also silently shocked. But very soon, his eyes once again fell on the top of the huge pillar of light that shot into the sky, piercing the clouds and changing the color of the sky. There was almost a black vortex that appeared faintly. For some reason, his heart suddenly trembled. This scene was very similar to the final scene of the gods subduing spell that the devil cult of the three realms had summoned at the end of the battle in the barren valley. Of course, at this time, although the sky was changing, there was no strange miraculous power like in the past, not to mention the terrifying eye that was hidden in the darkness like a demon. After walking for a while, Lu Chen saw many Kunlun disciples running out. In fact, according to the time, it was already late at night, and it was already the time of the Kunlun party's curfew. But what happened tonight was too big, and it was impossible for people to just sit in their rooms. More and more people appeared, and more people began to run in the direction of the winter peak. In the same direction, not only was the mysterious forbidden land in the sky and clouds, but also the main peak of the Kunlun party, Tiankuan Peak and Jingyang Hall, were also there. It seemed that everyone was a little out of their wits and wanted to seek guidance from the elders in the sect. Is it because such a big thing happened that the damn Baldy didn't come? Lu Chen pondered in his heart, but at this moment, his heart was filled with doubts. He really did not know who to trust. How many people do you really trust in this world? The kind of friend that he could completely trust, that he would never betray him? The night breeze was slightly chilly, caressing his face. Lu Chen's footsteps suddenly came to a halt. After a while, he sighed softly, a complicated expression on his face. It was also at this moment that the figure of a young girl suddenly appeared in his mind. It was Exan. Her smiling face seemed to be the most heartwarming thing in this cold world. Lu Chen smiled for no reason, and actually felt a little better. He raised his head again to look at the bright moon. The moonlight was bright, and at this moment, the night was actually somewhat bright and beautiful. For some reason, he felt a little tired of the place where the crowd was running to, but he remembered how Exan looked when she said she would come to find him a few days ago. Her smile seemed to have never been so clear in his heart. Lu Chen turned around and then said to himself in a low voice, "Forget it, let's go see that silly girl." The location of the fragrance garden tea room and the guest room happened to be in the opposite direction of the sky and clouds, as well as Tianquan Peak and other important places. When Lu Chen turned around and walked in that direction, he encountered many Kunlun disciples on the road. He was traveling in the opposite direction alone. Of course, he appeared to be out of the ordinary. However, it was currently night time and such a shocking event had happened. Almost all of the Kunlun disciples were in a state of panic. Hence, no one would pay attention to such an inconspicuous, ordinary character. In addition, along the way, Lu Chen tried to walk in the shadows of the roadside. Many people didn't even notice him and ran past him. Lu Chen secretly observed many people and found that many of them seemed to have gone to Tianquan Peak's Jinyang Hall to participate in the day's meeting. On their way back at night, such a big event suddenly happened, so they turned back one after another and rushed towards the collapsed mountain peak. What happened? What happened to Dongfeng Peak? Could it be that there are foreign enemies invading? Is there another big earthquake in the mountain? Along the way, Lu Chen didn't know how many questions like these were heard. Obviously, most of the Kunlun disciples still didn't know what had happened. After walking for about half of the journey, the front suddenly became empty. It seemed that most of the people had already rushed over, leaving only the dark houses and pavilions in front of him in silence in the night. Lu Chen remembered that Exan told him that she often stayed here these days because her master, Dongfang Tao, often came here to drink tea and chat with Melaleuca japonica. It seemed that the two of them had an unusually deep friendship. But now, Lu Chen was only worried that Exan was silly. Although it was very lively in the sky, she also ran over to watch the fun. It didn't matter if he couldn't find Exan tonight, but he had a faint feeling that the damn Baldy was very likely to be there at this moment. In this world, the person that Lu Chen couldn't see through the most and was most afraid of was the damn Baldy who had raised him since he was young. No one understood that person's strength better than him, and no one knew better than him how ruthless that person could be when he really hardened his heart. Of course, it was unlikely that a peerless person like the damn Baldy would care about a little girl like Exan. However, the slightest ripple on the side of a true lord might be a monstrous wave to an ordinary person. Lu Chen didn't want Exan to be in any danger, so he still went over. When he walked near the fragrance garden tea house, he saw that the house was pitch black without any lights. It didn't seem like anyone was still staying inside. Presumably, the people who were originally here were either already asleep, or they had been alarmed by the strange changes on Winter Peak and had all run out. Could it be that they really sneaked over to watch the fun? Lu Chen frowned. Just as he was thinking about whether he should go back to Tianquan Peak again, he suddenly heard a burst of footsteps from the side. Lu Chen turned his head to look, only to see that from the direction of the row of guest rooms on the other side of the tea house, in the same dark place, a figure suddenly ran out. His footsteps were a little unsteady, but his speed was very fast. With the help of the bright moonlight that night, Lu Chen clearly saw that person's face and was suddenly startled. He saw that this person was actually Sumo, but his expression seemed to be very strange. The muscles on his face were constantly twisting and twitching, and his eyes were also strangely red and white. At the same time, there were all kinds of expressions of fear and dread on his face, as if he had seen the most terrifying thing in the world, and he couldn't stop gasping for breath. When he ran out, Sumo seemed to also see Lu Chen standing alone on the other side. His footsteps slightly paused, and a trace of murderous intent floated in his eyes. Lu Chen's face darkened. He had been displeased with this young master Sumo for a long time. If it wasn't for that woman, Su Qingjun, he was afraid that he would have already made a move on Sumo. But in reality, even with Su Qingjun around, Lu Chen didn't really intend to completely let bygones be bygones with Sumo. He had asked old Ma to privately inquire about the daily whereabouts of the Su family just to vent his anger. So in this cold and cheerless night, when there was no one around, when Sumo seemed to show hostility towards him, not only did Lu Chen not shrink back in fear, but his eyes lit up and he suddenly took a step forward. But just when he was about to move, Sumo seemed to suddenly feel Lu Chen's murderous intent. This time, he suddenly became terrified, and with a strange cry, he actually turned around and ran. Lu Chen was stunned. He didn't think that this guy would actually run away so straightforwardly. He didn't even care about the face of an aristocratic family's disciple. If it was in the past, it seemed that Sumo wouldn't do such a thing. There was some doubt in his heart, but Lu Chen quickly frowned. After Sumo ran past, he smelled a faint smell of blood. His gaze focused, and he looked at Sumo's back. He saw that there was indeed a bloodstain on the man's right hand. Sumo quickly ran far away. Moreover, looking at the direction he ran in, he didn't go to Heavenly Kuan Peak or that lively place in the sky. Instead, he ran in the direction of going down the mountain. Could it be that this eccentric Su family's eldest young master is actually going back to his home in Kunwa City in the middle of the night? Lu Chen shook his head. After pondering for a moment, he finally gave up on the idea of tracking this person. Tonight was full of unusual phenomena, and a great change had taken place. There was no need to be anxious about such a small matter, so it was better not to complicate things. In the future, there would always be time to slowly find trouble with this guy. He turned around, ready to leave this place. Since Exian wasn't here, presumably, she also went to the sky to watch the fun. Needless to say, this kind of thing was indeed in line with Exian's temperament. Lu Chen could even imagine the very excited and impatient look on Exian's face when she called her friends. It was a little cute, but also a little stupid. He smiled and walked forward. The sound of his footsteps moving forward in the dark night fell in this bleak courtyard. The ground was still wet, and there were many drops of water dripping down. It was probably the result of the heavy downpour not long ago. He stepped over a puddle of water, and his body suddenly stopped. In the darkness, there was a cold night wind blowing. A faint smell of blood drifted along with the wind. Lu Chen turned around. His gaze was a little cold as he glanced around. Then, he slowly looked at the dark room on the other side of the guest room. There were several deep winding corridors and many dripping eaves. He silently stood where he was for a moment, and then he walked over. The moonlight shone on his body, elongating a dark shadow. Chapter 239. The sound of footsteps echoed in the quiet courtyard and corridors. There was a chill in the cold night that seemed to linger on, just like this world that was always covered in darkness. But fortunately, there would always be sunlight after the night. Although there were many darkness, there would always be warmth in life. Lu Chen subconsciously tightened his clothes. He did not know why, but his heart was beating faster. He did not know why he thought of Exian. It hadn't been a long time since he had first met this girl, but they had experienced a lot of things. There were many times when Lu Chen felt that Exian was a bit stupid. He was used to looking down at her and teasing her, joking with her. But now that he thought about it, Lu Chen suddenly realized that in these days, every time Exian smiled at him, the sky was bright and the air was warm. It was never him taking care of her. It had always been that young girl giving warmth to the lonely shadow that was struggling in the cold darkness. She had unknowingly pulled him out of the darkness slightly, letting him feel that little bit of warmth under the light. Perhaps it was not much, but it was precious. It was like a ray of light shining through the dark clouds. Although it was not strong, it was enough to illuminate the darkness. He slowly walked forward. Suddenly, he saw a black shadow lying on the ground in the corridor. It was a person lying on the ground, motionless. The night was too dark and the moonlight could not shine here. It was faint and blurry. Lu Chen could not see the person's face, but his heart suddenly beat faster. He felt that the figure was somewhat familiar. His mouth was dry. Was it nervousness or fear? Lu Chen did not know and did not have time to think about it. He held his breath and slowly walked over. Suddenly, he found that the smell of blood in the surroundings suddenly became stronger. It was coming from the person lying on the ground. An ominous premonition slammed into his heart, but perhaps his years as a shadow had long tempered his will into steel. As if he had lost the soft emotions of an ordinary person, Lu Chen did not scream or even lose his mind. He was like a cold and emotionless shadow as he slowly and cautiously squatted down beside the person and reached out to flip her over. When his hand touched that person's body, he suddenly felt a moist sensation on his hand. Immediately after, that person's body moved a little and suddenly raised his head. He looked at Lu Chen and called out, "Brother Lu?" Lu Chen's body trembled. Looking at Xian's pale face, he suddenly felt his body relax, as if there was a heavy burden on his heart. He was even slightly absent-minded for a moment before bursting into laughter. Xian looked at him strangely and asked, "What are you laughing at?" Lu Chen's tears seemed to be coming out from his laughter. He waved his hand and said, "Nothing, nothing, I just want to laugh when I see you." Xian mumbled something, no one knew what she was saying. Lu Chen, on the other hand, let out a long sigh of relief. He felt that everything that had happened tonight was insignificant. He felt that the night was very beautiful, the moon was very round. Perhaps the world was not completely dark, he laughed to himself. Then when he looked down, he saw his palm. The hand that he used to push Xian's body. His smile suddenly froze on his face. Under the moonlight, his hand was blood red. His palms and fingers were dripping with fresh blood. "The ground is so cold," Xian complained. Then she wanted to sit up. But she had only raised her body halfway when she suddenly lost her support and fell backwards. Lu Chen caught her and let Xian lean into his arms. He glanced at Xian's body. Her clothes were intact and there seemed to be no wounds. Then he looked at his own body. The clothes on his chest that she was leaning on were soaked with blood in just a short while. His face suddenly paled. He looked even paler than Xian's face. There was almost no blood. He carefully held Xian and moved his body forward a little. Then he looked at her back. His gaze was stunned. His body began to tremble slightly. Then he was silent. He slowly stretched out his hands and once again embraced Xian in his arms. Xian leaned comfortably on Lu Chen's chest and let out a long sigh. Her voice sounded a little low, but there was still some of her initial naivety. She said, "What happened? You don't seem to have any strength left." Lu Chen gently hugged her. His lips moved slightly. Then he said softly, "It's okay. I just need to rest for a while." Xian said, "Oh." She looked very obedient. It seemed that she had returned to the time when she was with Lu Chen in the land of chaos. She was obedient to everything he said. Lu Chen looked at her. A deep and inexplicable pain flashed through his eyes. But his expression seemed to be calm. He said as if nothing had happened, "Why are you lying on the ground?" "I don't know." Xian pouted. She looked a little angry. But soon, it seemed that she didn't even have the strength to be angry. She sighed and said, "I promised Sister Su that I would help her take care of Sumo in the guest room." Mo. Lu Chen closed his eyes and slowly said these two words. It was as if he was gritting his teeth and the sound came through the gaps between his teeth. "Yes, it's him." Xian said, "He took the medicine and has been sleeping." Then, well, it seemed to thunder, and he began to shout gibberish, but then he was all right again. I'm still standing here. I think of you, Brother Lu. Oh, the moon is good today. Hey, why is there a moon? Isn't it raining? Why did I faint? I don't know. Her voice became softer and softer. Her eyes began to close slowly. It seemed that she was very tired. Lu Chen looked at the girl in his arms. He seemed to have thousands of words in his heart, but he couldn't say a word. Xian's slender eyelashes moved. She opened her eyes again and said softly, "Why do I feel a little uncomfortable?" Lu Chen stood up silently. He carried Xian and walked forward, leaving this dark world. Then he said calmly, "It's nothing. You're a little injured." Injured? Xian seemed a little surprised. But she seemed to be too tired. She didn't think to see where she was injured. Yes. Lu Chen repeated gently to her. Then he smiled and said, "It's just a small injury. It's nothing." "Oh, I don't want it." Xian suddenly cried softly. "Don't what?" Lu Chen asked her. At the same time, he had already walked out of the corridor and walked down the mountain. Xian frowned. She seemed to be afraid and disgusted. She pouted and said, "I don't want that kind of bug. You used to always put bugs on me. It's disgusting." Lu Chen's footsteps paused. He continued to walk forward. At the same time, he said softly, "Okay, don't put that bug juice on me. Besides, I can't find that kind of thing now." Xian suddenly seemed happy. She smiled. But her whole body slowly leaned against his chest. She said softly, "Brother Lu, I'm a little cold." Lu Chen's hands tightened. He held her in his arms. At the same time, a drop of water fell on Xian's white face. Xian's eyes seemed to be a little blurry. But she still felt it. She shook her head and said, "Hey, it's raining. Or are you crying? Brother Lu?" "Nonsense. I've killed countless people. I have a heart of stone for more than 10 years. How could I cry?" Lu Chen said with a smile. He walked forward. Then, a drop of water fell from his cheek and fell on Xian's chest. "Oh." Xian answered. She seemed to completely believe Lu Chen's words. But after a moment, she asked again, "Brother Lu, can you cure my injury?" I said, "It's a small matter. The medicine will cure it. Don't worry." Lu Chen said. "But I don't want to stay here." Xian said. "I'll take you away." Lu Chen said immediately. His tone was as firm as steel, as if this was the right thing to do, as if everything was only natural. "Where do you want to go?" Lu Chen asked. Xian's head was completely leaning on his chest. Her eyes were slightly closed. Her face was so pale that it seemed to be transparent. The breath in her mouth was also weak. But it seemed that she still didn't want to sleep. She still wanted to talk. So she persisted and woke up again. She forced her eyes open and smiled at Lu Chen. "I want to see my parents." Xian said. "Let's go now." Lu Chen held her and suddenly sped up. But after a moment, he suddenly felt something. He looked down and saw that Xian's eyes were open. She was staring at his face. "What's wrong?" Lu Chen suddenly didn't dare to look at this pair of pure and clear eyes. He looked away. Then, he heard Xian whisper, "Brother Lu, you lied to me again." "I didn't," Xian suddenly interrupted him and said, "I saw it. You were crying so sadly." Under the moonlight, the man's face was covered in tears. He shook his head and gritted his teeth, trying to laugh. But each laugh turned into a hoarse whimper. He wanted to beat his chest and yell at her, but he didn't dare to look at her eyes again. Under the moonlight, he held the girl and staggered forward. He was like a stray dog that had lost its home. He crazily wanted to grasp the last bit of hope, but in the end, he couldn't stop the girl and that warmth from leaving. Her pale hand reached out and wiped his face, wiping away some of the tears. Then she complained to herself, although her voice was very soft and low. I haven't even gone to the heaven vault cloud realm. In the end, even the mountain has collapsed. How boring. Her voice gradually became lower and finally couldn't be heard. Lu Chen's footsteps instantly stopped. He watched as that hand slid down from his face and weakly slid to the girl's side. He was dumbfounded. He slowly raised his head and looked at the deep night sky, as well as the cold moon. The black fire once again burned fiercely in his eyes. A terrifying and ice-cold murderous intent leaped out from the darkness like the shadow of a demon, emitting a soundless howl towards the darkness. The night, the deeper it got, the colder it got. Chapter 240. Su Qingjun left the Xingyang Hall on Heavenly Kuan Peak a little later than most people. She was passing by Qiandang, Mingyue, and her master, Daoist Master Muyuan, when Daoist Master Mingzhu suddenly asked her to wait at the entrance. Masato Kihara was somewhat dissatisfied with this, but Su Qingjun was a filial disciple, so in order to avoid conflict between her master and them, she voluntarily stayed behind. Later, He came over, but Su Qingjun didn't like this person, even though He was one of the most outstanding genius disciples of the younger generation of the Kunlun party, just like her. Sumo was her only younger brother, but he was seriously injured by He, so the hatred between them was already very deep. Moreover, Su Qingjun could more or less feel that although He usually didn't do anything out of line, including looking at her with a peaceful gaze most of the time, he also had a feeling of disgust towards the Su family. Su Qingjun didn't know how the Su family on her side had offended him, that he would always target the Su family. Perhaps it was because of He Gang's death a few days ago. In retrospect, He Gang's death was indeed a little strange. No matter who saw the timing of his death, they would suspect that the Su family secretly did it to vent their anger. But Su Qingjun herself knew that the Su family didn't do it. After leaving Xingyang Hall, Su Qingjun was worried about Sumo, who was still unconscious in the Fragrance Garden's guest room, so she rushed all the way back. But halfway there, she heard a loud noise, just like countless Kunlun party disciples, and then witnessed the most shocking change in the Kunlun Mountains in 1,000 years. Strange peaks fell, the mountains collapsed, and a terrible and huge pillar of light soared into the sky. It was a scene of doomsday. The entire Kunlun Mountain was in an uproar. Everyone in the Kunlun party was in a state of panic. Countless people rushed out of their houses and rushed over there. Su Qingjun was also in the crowd. At that moment, she was also shocked. Then, when she saw a large number of people rushing over, she involuntarily followed them into the sky. For such an earth-shattering phenomenon, something unimaginable must have happened. It might even be related to the survival of the entire Kunlun sect. Because it was the winter peak where Hakushin Jinkuan's Immortal's Cave was located among the clouds in the sky. What the hell happened? She also wanted to know. After returning to Jinkuan Peak's Xingyang Hall with the flow of people in that direction, Su Qingjun soon found that things seemed to be more complicated than she thought. The elders of the Kunlun party were indeed experienced and knowledgeable. They did not panic in the face of chaos. In a short while, several Yuanyingzhenren came out to calm the crowd. At the same time, they kept issuing orders, and soon, the situation was under control. The crowd slowly calmed down, but there were many people as smart and astute as Su Qingjun. They quickly noticed that something was not quite right. Such a big event had happened, but the head of the Kunlun party, Idle Month, did not come out to command the overall situation. Even though everyone knew that he should definitely be in Xingyang Hall that night. The Yuanyingzhenren who came out to command and calm the crowd were mostly from the Baichao Tang branch. Su Qingjun even saw her own master, Masato Kihara, among them. When the bright moonlight suddenly appeared in the sky, she could clearly see her master's face brimming with excitement and a smile. Even his voice and movements when he was giving orders to others had unconsciously become confident and at ease. Su Qingjun had some guesses in her heart, but she was not too willing to believe in her intuition. Therefore, she had been standing in the crowd and did not go forward. After staying on Tianquan Peak for a while, she found that those Yuanyingzhenren had no intention of arranging for people to go to the clouds in the sky. She then quietly left. The moonlight was very bright, but the night was equally dark. The Kunlun mountain range, which had just experienced an earth-shattering change, seemed to still be shrouded in darkness. Su Qingjun walked quickly towards the direction of the fragrance garden. As she walked and walked, there was no trace of other people on the road. Seeing that she was about to reach the mountain peak where the fragrance garden was located, Su Qingjun's footsteps suddenly stopped. She felt a slightly fishy wind blowing from the mountain path ahead. Immediately after, a human figure suddenly appeared. A man staggered down from the mountain path ahead. His expression was one of panic and fear, as if he had seen the thing he was most afraid of in his life. It was Sumo. Su Qingjun was shocked and quickly went up to greet him. She called out, "Sumo, what happened to you?" Sumo's body trembled. Her eyes that seemed to be in a state of confusion and blankness suddenly seemed to clear up a little. She stopped and looked toward Su Qingjun. After being stunned for a moment, she suddenly called out in a hoarse voice, "Sister?" Su Qingjun ran in front of her and looked at Sumo's disheveled appearance with astonishment. She said, "You're awake. Are you feeling better? Why did you suddenly run down the mountain by yourself?" Sumo stared blankly at her. After a while, she said, "I'm fine. I want to go home now and tell father and mother this good news so they don't have to worry anymore." Su Qingjun hesitated for a moment, but in the end, she still nodded. The Kunlun party couldn't be considered too peaceful tonight, so going to her home in Kunwa City could be considered a safe place. She immediately said in a soft voice, "That's fine too. You can go. I have to first thank the elders for saving you. I'll also go back to see you later." "Right, isn't Enchanting looking after you?" "She's now." Before she could finish speaking, she saw Sumo suddenly turn around and run away with large strides, looking as if he was very anxious. Su Qingjun's words were stuck in her mouth for a moment. Soon after, she frowned and looked at Sumo with some surprise. There was a bit of doubt in her eyes, but perhaps it was because she saw him running as if he was flying and seemed to be really well, so she relaxed. After standing in place and thinking for a moment, she decided to continue up the mountain. In any case, Dongfang Tao and Melaleuca Japonica, the two elders, had treated her younger brother, Sumo, so she had to thank them in person. Little sister Enchanting had helped her greatly, so she also had to go and thank them. In fact, it was reasonable to say that Sumo should also stay and thank them. However, since this good-for-nothing brat ran away by himself, she would have to complete these things herself. She sighed softly, shook her head, and walked up the mountain. The mountain path was undulating and curved, and the moonlight shone through the gaps between the branches of the forest, shining on her beautiful face. In the darkness of the night, there was a bit of coldness. After walking for an unknown amount of time, probably halfway up the mountain, Su Qingjun suddenly heard the sound of footsteps coming down from the mountain. The footsteps sounded especially heavy, and the sound paused, as if they were stepping on the bottom of her heart, drifting out in the darkness, trampling through the original silence of this place. Su Qingjun stopped in her tracks, a little surprised. As the footsteps approached, she saw the figure walking in front of her. Her eyes suddenly widened, and the surprise on her face instantly turned into inconceivable shock and fear. A person walked down the mountain path. To be exact, it was a person holding another person's body. With the help of the moonlight falling from the sky, Su Qingjun could clearly see that the man was Lu Qin, and the pale-faced woman he was tightly hugging, and the person who had one hand hanging limply by her side, was Enchanting. "You! Enchanting!" Su Qingjun exclaimed in surprise and ran over with quick steps. However, she'd just arrived before Enchanting when she smelled a strong smell of blood. Moreover, Exion's practically pale face and chest that had stopped rising and falling had already explained everything. Su Qingjun almost could not believe her own eyes. When she left this morning, Exion was clearly that lively young lady with a sweet smile. How did it become like this at night? What happened to her? Su Qingjuan's eyes were misty, her voice trembling as she looked up at Lu Chen and asked. Then, her body suddenly shook, a shocked expression on her face, and subconsciously took a step back. The Lu Chen in front of her seemed to be completely different from the man in her memory. The warmth and cheerfulness he once had, and that smile that seemed to be there forever, had all disappeared. Right now, Lu Chen's face was solemn, expressionless, looking like it was carved out of stone, cold and full of killing intent. Lu Chen's eyes were perhaps the only part of his face that still had some liveliness, but for some reason, Su Qingjun felt that she might be seeing things, because she seemed to see flames from that pair of eyes, and what's more, that fire was actually black. Just like this boundless, deep night. She's dead. Lu Chen's voice sounded emotionless, so cold as if he was talking about something that had nothing to do with him. Su Qingjun shook her head in disbelief, did not even have the time to care about the strange look in Lu Chen's eyes. Her eyes once again fell on Exion's face, said in a low voice, Why is it like this? Aren't you helping me look after Sumo? When I saw him just now, he was still fine. Why would you suddenly? You saw Sumo? Lu Chen suddenly asked. That voice sounded a bit cold, like the cold wind in this night, blowing coldly. Su Qingjun looked at Exion, her mouth half open, her face sorrowful, as if she still could not immediately accept this reality, nodded subconsciously, said, Yes, just now, at the foot of the mountain. Where did he go? Su Qingjun said, He said he wanted to go home first, so I let him go, said I wanted to come over to thank Exion and her master, and we'll go back later. Lu Chen suddenly stepped forward, and Su Qingjun was startled, hurriedly stopped him, said, Where are you going? What is going on with Exion? Lu Chen suddenly turned his head, coldly looked at her. In that pair of eyes, there seemed to be a ghost fire flickering, the dark flames suddenly flourished, an icy bone-piercing chill seemed to hit her in the face. Su Qingjuan's whole body turned cold, her heart greatly alarmed, retreating 2 steps back. At that moment, she actually felt so clearly, that terrifying killing intent directly enveloped her body. Chapter 241. That killing intent was so dense that it was almost tangible, like an ice-cold blade piercing through the air. Moreover, it faintly carried a primitive, ancient, and even barbaric aura of killing intent that Su Qingjun had never seen before. That was an undisguised killing intent. Su Qingjuan's face was slightly pale, and one of her hands even subconsciously reached out to grab the treasured sword that she was wearing. However, although Lu Chen's eyes were cold and filled with killing intent, he did not make any further movements. Instead, when he saw Su Qingjun take 2 steps back to make way for the mountain path, he silently carried Exion and quickly walked down the mountain. When he walked past Su Qingjun, perhaps it was an illusion, but Su Qingjun seemed to feel that behind this man's terrifying killing intent, his footsteps seemed to slightly pause, like a small ripple suddenly appearing in a pool of stagnant water. The night was deep, the night wind was cold, and behind him was a long shadow of darkness. The moonlight was mostly blocked by the shade of the trees, and in the end, his face could not be seen. He stood in the darkness. He walked in the shadows. This cold and lonely night was ice cold, and the only place that had a bit of warmth was beside him. It was that woman. In the midst of confusion and shock, there was still some concern in her clear eyes. He still remembered, her hands were soft, and she once hugged him so warmly. In the darkness, it was too cold and lonely, and he really did not want it to be like this. But at that moment, he suddenly thought of Ding Dang, the girl who was buried in a lonely grave. Then, there was an even more cheerful and lively girl who was as warm as the sun in the sky. Now, she was lying in the crook of his arms, her body slowly cooling down. They all laughed and cried by his side, like sunlight shining into the darkness, like a rainbow falling into his heart. They were the only warm colors in his dark life, and then they all silently left. His heart turned cold, like frost and iron, cutting off the warmth that was so close to him. Even if there was a moment where he wanted to grab onto that last bit of warmth, he would not be able to do so. So he didn't turn around, didn't speak, didn't look at her, he didn't do anything. This man was like a proud and aloof wolf cruising in the wilderness, facing the wind and snow, abandoning the warmth he longed for, striding into the distance of the deep night, letting the shadow of darkness completely engulf him. Without looking back, he walked further and further away from the woman behind him. Su Qingjun stood there in a daze, watching Lu Chen walk away with Xian's body in his arms until he disappeared into the darkness. His figure could no longer be seen. Her mind was in a mess, and she couldn't figure out what was going on. On the night of the full moon, too many strange things happened in the mountains of Kunlun. Everything seemed to be wrong and different from before. Her heart was in a mess, and she didn't know why she always had a feeling of fear. She seemed to have thought of something, but that cold feeling that made her tremble made her almost instinctively want to give up thinking. Su Qingjun closed her eyes, standing on this deserted mountain path. She suddenly took a deep breath. She gritted her teeth, clenched her fists, frowned her beautiful and delicate brows, quietly recalling, thinking. Then, her face slowly turned pale. She thought of what she had seen at the foot of the mountain. She thought of the child who had fled in panic, as if he had done something wrong and wanted to run home to hide under the wings of his parents. Then, her body suddenly shook, she opened her eyes and looked into the distant horizon, looking at the direction of the clouds in the sky. Her face instantly turned pale, muttering, "Heaven and earth power, Mount Lingshan has collapsed." She stood there in a daze, only feeling that her whole body was cold, like falling into an ice cellar. A trace of pain slowly appeared on her face. Her mouth called out in a low voice, "Sumo." In the night, Kunwa city was as tall and majestic as before, but it was no longer bustling, and the long street was deserted. Occasionally, one or two shadows ran by, but if one looked carefully, they were all stray dogs and cats. Fatty Old Ma, who had always been very lazy, didn't sleep in that night. He left that secluded alley and hid in a deep and dark corner on the deserted long street. That place was a loft on a tall building, from which he could clearly see the movements on the streets near Kunwa city, and he could also overlook the movements of the distant Kunlun mountain. Unsurprisingly, he also saw the earth-shattering scene. After being moved by it, he became even more nervous. He closely watched this big city because this was the task given to him by that person. The night grew darker. At a certain point in the night, on this deserted long street, Old Ma sat up straight and looked into the distance. He saw that under the gloomy night, there were a lot of indistinct shadows moving about in the darkness. Although most of them were scattered and didn't travel together, it was easy to see that those shadows in the darkness were all heading in the same direction, Kunlun Mountain. Presumably, what happened on the mountain tonight had finally alarmed all the demons and monsters hiding in the darkness. Hiding in the darkness, Old Ma sneered with contempt in his eyes. But at this moment, he suddenly saw a figure staggering over from a distance. Under the moonlight, Old Ma recognized at a glance that this was the young master of the Su family, Sumo. Old Ma's spirit was roused, but at the same time, he was also a bit surprised. This person was named by Lu Chen for him to pay attention to and investigate. At this moment, this person appeared on the long street in the middle of the night with a panicked expression and unsteady footsteps. Obviously, something had happened. He hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he still didn't plan to make a move. He just watched as Sumo ran down the long street. And looking at the direction he was running in, he should be heading towards the Su family. Monitoring the movements in this city and a mere Sumo, Old Ma naturally knew the importance of this. But in his heart, he was also a bit bewildered. He didn't know what had happened to this person called Sumo. Just now, looking at his expression, it was as if he had really seen a ghost. It seemed that he was really quite frightened. After thinking like this for a long time without any results, Old Ma's gaze once again swept across the long street. Suddenly, his body shook and he suddenly stood up. On the long street, a man walked over. It was impressively Lu Chen. The cold night wind blew coldly through the long street. That man walked out from the darkness. He carried the body of a woman and looked ahead. The darkness around him rolled and surged, like a roaring demon, like a roaring demon. The clear and cold moonlight shone on the long street, but could not illuminate his figure. The dark flames burned fiercely on his body. It was as if after a long period of imprisonment, he had finally thrown off the suppression. On this day, on this night, he wildly and wantonly burned. Every part of his skin was attached to the black flames. The flames danced wildly in the wind, but did not damage his flesh, skin, or the clothes on his body in the slightest. The night seemed to freeze. All the creatures on this long street suddenly became silent. What remained was only a strong killing intent that had never been seen before. Like a tide, like an angry wave, surging and surging, like a monstrous wave, it followed that man's figure and surged forward. The blood drained from old Ma's face, his eyes filled with fear. He looked in shock at Lu Chen and the strange black flames on his body. After hesitating again and again, he suddenly clenched his teeth, a determined expression on his face. He leapt out from the attic and ran in front of Lu Chen. With a low roar, he stretched out his hands to stop him. "Have you gone mad?" Old Ma roared loudly, wanting to wake Lu Chen. But after a moment, his gaze fell on the face of the woman in Lu Chen's arms. Looking at that familiar and pale face, as well as the aura of death that he could not be more familiar with, Old Ma's face also paled. The corners of his eyes twitched and he said in a low voice, "Damn it." Lu Chen glanced at him but did not say anything. He did not even stop and continued to walk forward. At the same time, he expressionlessly said, "Get out of my way." Old Ma was intimidated by his imposing manner. For a moment, he subconsciously retreated to one side and then followed beside Lu Chen. With an anxious face, he advised, "Lu Chen, don't go crazy. Listen to me, I don't know how many spies of the devil cult are in this city right now. It's because of the big change on Kunlun Mountain tonight that most of them have gone to the foot of Kunlun Mountain to watch. The city is empty. Listen to me, stop now and come with me. It's still not too late." Lu Chen's face was as cold as ice, unmoved. He still carried Exian and walked forward. Old Ma was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan. But he did not dare to approach Lu Chen. The terrible black fire burning around him made his hair stand on end. Suddenly, Old Ma seemed to think of something and said, "Are you going to kill Sumo?" For the first time, Lu Chen's countenance changed slightly. He glanced at Old Ma. Old Ma immediately said, "I just saw him running over. He should be going back to the Su family." Lu Chen nodded and took another step forward. A footprint instantly appeared on the ground of the long street. The dark aura suddenly rose and danced wildly behind him, drowning the entire street. And the direction in which the sea of darkness was flowing was towards the Su mansion in the distance. Old Ma was so frightened that he jumped a few steps forward. He tried to stay as far away from the terrible darkness as possible. At the same time, he gritted his teeth and shouted at Lu Chen, who was almost surrounded by the darkness, "Lu Chen, don't do this. It's not worth it." Lu Chen turned a deaf ear and walked forward. The darkness roared around him. "Do you know that the matter on Kunlun Mountain has been settled? His Excellency has the overall situation under control. Next, you can stand out and live the kind of life you have been looking forward to." Lu Chen's footsteps paused for a moment. But the darkness did not stop. After a moment, he and the dark flames were already moving forward, approaching the mansion with the tightly closed gate. Old Ma roared and rushed in front of him. He stretched out his hands to stop him and shouted, "Are you crazy? You will kill yourself if you do this. With such a big movement, the people of the evil cult will definitely be aware of it. From then on, there will be countless people hunting you down. And you openly used this black fire sorcery. Under the watchful eyes of the public, even Zhengxianmeng will not be able to protect you. Instead, he will order the Kunlun party and Zhengxianmeng to hunt you down together. If you do this, the world will be happy to kill you. If you do this, there will be no place for you in the world. If you do this, everything in the past will be in vain. Is it worth it?" Is it worth it? Is it worth it? Old Ma was forced to retreat by Lu Chen. He retreated until he reached the front gate of the Su mansion. At the same time, he was still shouting at Lu Chen at the top of his voice. When the dark aura finally neared the gate of the mansion, when Old Ma crazily roared at him a few times, "Is it worth it?" Lu Chen's footsteps finally stopped. He stood in the darkness, the black fire burning on his body. It seemed to be roaring fiercely at the darkness of the night. He quietly looked at Old Ma, whose face was full of anxiety. Then he raised his head and looked at the dark night sky. The darkness seemed to be boundless and deep like the ocean. This night was really desolate. Chapter 242. Darkness surged outside the gate of the Su mansion, and the murderous aura filled the sky. Of course, it was impossible for such a strange scene to not alarm the Su mansion. Inside the high walls, there was already a clamor of screams, but the Su family were also alert, and no one was stupid enough to open the gate. Instead, on the two sides of the high walls, there were people climbing up a few ladders, looking outside. Then the people who saw the situation outside were scared stiff, and one timid person even fell off the ladder. And on the street outside the gate of the Su mansion, Lu Chen and Old Ma were still vaguely facing each other. Old Ma gritted his teeth and stood in front of the Su mansion, blocking Lu Chen. He roared in a low voice, half anxious and half angry, "Wake up, you are no longer that young and ignorant boy. If you take this wrong step, you really won't be able to turn back." The corner of Lu Chen's eye twitched slightly, and he stood silently. His eyes slowly lowered, falling on the face of Exin in his arms. Her face was abnormally pale, but her expression was very serene, as if this chest was the most secure place for her. There seemed to be a faint trace of a beautiful smile at the corner of her mouth, and at this moment, Lu Chen even seemed to be able to hear her laughter. That girl, as usual, was laughing and scolding him, saying that he was stupid and stupid. As a person, of course, he shouldn't be so stupid. Her voice was pleasant to listen to, like the clear sound of a crystal wind chime in the wind. The cold wind blew through the long street, and the darkness floated and swayed, taking away all the illusions. In the end, she still could not speak. Lu Chen silently squatted down, and gently placed Exin's body on the ground. His movements were abnormally gentle, as if he was afraid of hurting her if he used even a little force. He lowered his head, and his eyes never left Exin's face. After a moment, Old Ma suddenly heard Lu Chen's voice, softly saying, "Young man." He slowly stood up, and raised his eyes to stare ahead. The dark flame was burning, as if using his soul as the torch, as if it was the madness of his life's fate. From ignorance to knowledge, from youth to adulthood. From hunger and thirst to loneliness, from calmness to indifference, from light to darkness, from darkness to shadow, it had been more than 10 years. In the blink of an eye, it was still this familiar city. In those dirty corners of the night, even the aura of the shadows had not changed. Had the youngster grown up? The night shrouded his figure, and he laughed silently in the darkness. Old Ma looked at Lu Chen's expression, and his expression suddenly changed. He couldn't help but take a step forward, but a moment later, his whole body shook, and an icy chill rushed over him. The man in the darkness suddenly raised his head and roared. His expression was cold as he walked forward. This step actually had the sound of breaking through the air. The bluestone on the long street instantly shattered, and a dark shadow whizzed up, like the shadow of a carnival ghost, like a surging tide, trampling through the ice, breaking through the imprisonment. Just as I am not a teenager, and you are forever young, let this long night bloom for you, the flower of darkness that will never wither. In front of the whole Su mansion, the darkness suddenly flourished, and countless dark flames spewed out from the man's body, with the world's deepest evil, with the darkest wildness and anger, surging over. Old Ma screamed and took a few steps back. He was only grazed by the edge of the black tide, but he already felt the blood in his chest churning. Old Ma turned pale with fright. He didn't dare to stay here, and immediately rolled and crawled to the side. At the same time, he shouted, "Madman! Crazy. Are you crazy? The tide of darkness surrounded Lu Chen and came to the closed door of the Su mansion. Like a storm, like a huge wave, the black tide suddenly rushed down. At that moment, the world was silent, and the night was bleak. The heart of a young man, although old, is still there. A real man, even if he dies, will not regret. Boom! With a loud noise, the surrounding land and high walls all shook, and the cracking sound came thrillingly in the dark night. Under the rolling of the black tide, the thick doors suddenly collapsed, directly exploding inward, turning into countless fragments that scattered in all directions, revealing a naked big hole. The dark tide was boiling, as if it had reached an extreme carnival. It suddenly danced, wrapped up all the light and darkness, and then followed the determined and angry figure, striding forward. Stepping into the door. There was a moment of silence in the Su mansion, and then there was a commotion. Screams and screams came from behind, and as far as the eye could see, there were at least a dozen people with sharp blades rushing over. Lu Chen strode forward, his face expressionless. The black tide rushed past him as if it was real. In a moment, the sharp screams tore through the night. The 3 Su family people who rushed over already had a bloody hole in their chest, and blood gushed out like a fountain, smearing the first trace of blood on this dark night. Lu Chen's footsteps paused slightly, and a strange black aura flitted across his face. It was a familiar ice-cold feeling. Once again, it was plundered from those lifeless corpses into his body, rushing through his meridians and merging into the dark 5 elements divine disk. The black fire became hotter and hotter, the black tide swayed wildly, like an unbearably hungry demon, but also like a hysterical laughter towards the world. That roar seemed to come from the 9 serene hell, terrifying and terrifying. But Lu Chen did not seem to hear it, and went straight forward, killing people in his way, and breaking down trees and walls. Those ordinary guards and servants were no match for him, and almost all died in an instant under his hands. Lu Chen also turned a blind eye to the maids and servants who were running in all directions in the distance and didn't attack him. His eyes, which flickered with black flames, swept over the mansion shrouded in darkness, and then he looked at a place he had been to before, the small courtyard that belonged to Sumo. He sneered coldly in the darkness and strode forward. Behind him, Old Ma was lying on his stomach in front of the messy gate of the Su mansion. His face was ashen, and his expression was dejected. Looking at the blood on the ground and the dark figure who was slaughtering people, he let out a long sigh and said, "It's over, it's over." In the quiet night sky, a ray of light streaked across the dark sky, rushing towards Kunwa City like a gust of wind and a bolt of lightning. Under the dim light of the night, the raging black flame soared into the sky, and the murderous aura shook the surroundings. For a moment, it also startled countless phantoms in the darkness. It was unknown how many people in the deep darkness suddenly turned their heads. And it was unknown how much deep hatred was reignited in the darkness of the night. The darkness hibernating under the blue dome of heaven and the black shadows under the high mountain began to turn their heads one after another. Even in the fog in the deepest part of Kunlun Mountain, a black shadow as huge as a mountain suddenly moved. The fog wrapped around its huge and frightening body, but it couldn't stop the pair of dragon eyes burning with black flames from emerging from the fog. It gazed at the city in the distance, as well as the black flame rising from the city. However, the moment it was about to leave the fog, a tall and sturdy figure suddenly appeared in the air. It was true Lord Tianlan. With his back facing the frightening and huge black dragon in the fog, he had a cold expression on his face, but he stretched out a hand and blocked the front of the fog. The huge dragon eyes coldly stared at the back of the fat figure, and a terrifying aura as huge as a mountain seemed about to spit out on the body of this bald fat man. But true Lord Tianlan seemed to be completely unaware of it. He just floated in the air and blocked the black dragon's front. His hand was steady and powerful. As the wind blew, his loose robe fluttered. The black dragon silently gazed at him. A moment later, accompanied by a deep sound like a dragon's roar, the huge black shadow slowly retreated into the fog. At the same time, a somewhat strange voice came from the air and echoed in true Lord Tianlan's ears. Interesting, true Lord Tianlan's expression didn't change in the slightest, as if he hadn't heard the voice. But he was also gazing at Kunwas city in the distance. His eyes also saw the murderous aura and the black flame soaring into the sky. After a moment, a ray of light suddenly swept over. It was perfected 1,000 lanterns of the Kunlun party. With a solemn expression, he cupped his hands toward true Lord Tianlan. After saluting him, he said in a deep voice, "The black flame evil technique has appeared in Kunwas city, and the murderous aura is soaring into the sky. It must be an evildoer of the devil cult. Or perhaps he's vainly trying to take advantage of the chaos in our sect tonight. At this time, when the people's hearts are in turmoil, we must deal a heavy blow and show no mercy to intimidate the thieves in all directions. I want to personally lead a group of the sect's elite experts to immediately go down the mountain to suppress and exterminate the evildoers of the devil cult. I've come to ask for your order." True Lord Tianlan silently looked in the direction of Kunwas city. He wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. In the depths of his eyes, a complicated glimmer flashed. After a moment, he indifferently nodded and said, "All right." The Sioux residence was in a mess, but it was, after all, an aristocratic family that had existed for many years and had a strong foundation. Very soon, some cultivators with high cultivation rushed out of the residence. Some of them were disciples of the Sioux family, and some were cultivators invited by the Sioux family. Among them, many were even in the foundation building realm. It should be known that in the current cultivation world, the cultivation of the foundation building realm was already very powerful. However, on this night, Lu Chen's strange black flame was like a natural killing machine. It seemed to be the natural nemesis of these cultivators. In front of the wild and whistling black flame, all spells and divine abilities were quickly corroded and destroyed, and what followed was a cruel and merciless death. Even though Lu Chen was fighting one against many, he still didn't fall into a disadvantageous position. What was more frightening was that the surrounding cultivators who besieged him almost quickly felt a strange fact. Not only did this fiend's strength not weaken as the battle dragged on, it became even stronger. To be exact, every time Lu Chen killed a person, the black flame on his body became a bit thicker and deeper, and its power became a bit stronger. The gloomy life force plundered from these dead cultivators was 10 times or even 100 times more than what Lu Chen had plundered in the past. At this moment, the 5 elements divine disk in his sea of qi was roaring, hungrily devouring the endless life force of killing, and then causing the black flame on Lu Chen's body to become even crazier. He's not a human. He's a ghost. Finally, someone broke down under the great pressure. In the face of death, he screamed wildly, dropped his weapon, turned around, and ran away. The people besieging Lu Chen roared and screamed wildly, but finally, under the attack of death, they gradually dispersed. They either died or fled. The high wall suddenly collapsed, and Lu Chen walked into the yard. The 2-story building in his memory was gone, which was cut open by Su Qingjuan's sword. But on the other side of the yard, another gorgeous house was built. At this moment, at the door of the hall, Sumo stood there, and his parents, Su Tianhe and Madame Bai, stood in front of him, blocking him behind them. Lu Chen sneered, staring at Sumo behind the 2 people. His eyes were boiling with black fire, like a demon or a ghost, and he was about to walk forward. But at this moment, suddenly there was a sharp whistle in the night sky, and a sword light pierced through the air, straight down, and rushed to the middle of Lu Chen and the 3 people of the Su family. After a moment, the light dissipated, and a figure appeared. It was a woman with a resolute expression, with a trace of pain. It was Su Qingjun. In the mansion under the night, there seemed to be continuous shouting and screaming in the distance, but at this time, the courtyard fell into a sudden silence. The night wind blew, blowing the woman's soft hair, and on her red shawl, beautiful feathers fluttered in the wind. She looked back at her family, and her parents stood in front. Although her father, Su Tianhe, had a shocked expression, he was still calm, while her mother had a trace of fear on her face. But perhaps it was family love that suppressed all fear. Even though Madame Bai's body was trembling slightly, she still did not take a step back and tightly grabbed her only son's hand, blocking in front of him. And her only brother, Sumo, at this moment, seemed to have a strange expression, and his mind seemed to be clear and muddled, but every time his eyes became clear, he saw Lu Chen in front of him, wrapped in darkness, and his expression became abnormally ugly. The corner of Su Qingjuan's mouth twitched, and a trace of a miserable smile appeared on his face. Then, he slowly turned around, facing Lu Chen, looking at the man swallowed by darkness, looking at the figure that burned like a demon with black fire. Lu Chen was silent, and then he walked forward, and the darkness surged around him, pressing towards Su Qingjun like a tide. But Su Qingjun stood in the same place, motionless, and did not seem to have any intention of moving away. The black fire in Lu Chen's eyes burned, and his footsteps did not stop, and he came closer and closer to her. Su Qingjuan's hands were tightly clenched, and after a moment, she suddenly said in a loud voice, "This is an accident." "Really, this is an accident." Su Qingjuan's face showed a painful expression, and she lowered her voice, saying, "I went to beg Master Exian to save Sumo, and he also gave Sumo the antidote. Everything should have been fine, unless there was a change in heaven and earth that caused the medicine to go out of control. But it was such a coincidence that Dong Feng was destroyed." Lu Chen walked in silence, and the tide of darkness had already approached Su Qingjun, and it was only a few zhang away. Even Madame Bai, who was behind him, cried out in alarm, but Su Qingjun still did not have any intention of retreating. "What happened to little sister Exian? I am also very sad. If possible, I really want to suffer in her place. I also know that no matter what I say, I can't save her life. It's Sumo's fault." But at that time, he must have lost his mind. Lu Chen. She closed her eyes and smiled bitterly. "No matter what, I really can't watch him die like this. I can only beg you, can you let him live? No matter what price you want me, or my Su family to pay, I will do it. In my life, I have never opened my mouth to beg anyone, but tonight, I beg you." Under the night, that beautiful woman said in a sorrowful voice. She bit her lips, and there was a desolate expression on her face. In her eyes, there was guilt, sadness, disappointment, and pain, as if they were all mixed together, and then she looked at the man walking in the darkness. And what she waited for was a short answer. "No." The darkness was like a resurrected demonic dragon. Following this resolute sentence, it rose with a loud bang, and pounced towards the back of Su Qingjun. And at this moment, Su Qingjun seemed to finally let out a sigh, and pulled out her sword with a backhand. Clang! The sound of the sword was like a dragon's roar, and the flickering bright light left the sheath, like the autumn water sprinkling on the world, and stood horizontally in front of the darkness. That beautiful woman held her sword horizontally in front of her, her face pale, but her aura was like a mountain, like the moon, towering and erect, and actually blocked all the aura of the darkness for a moment. The moonlight sprinkled down, and her silhouette seemed so powerful, even though it was a little lonely. That was the strongest young genius of the Kunlun party in 1,000 years, the youngest Jean Dan Friar. The ice-cold aura suddenly surged from the darkness, and directly slashed at Su Qingjun from all directions. Su Qingjun let out a clear whistle, and her body rose together with her sword. Instead of retreating, she advanced, and directly stabbed her sword into the depths of the darkness. There was an angry roar in the raging dark tide, and the darkness behind her surrounded Su Qingjun's figure. The three people of the Su family turned pale with fright, but after a moment, they only heard the whistling sound of the sword, and a sword ray that was as bright as lightning crisscrossed in the dark aura, as if it was not restricted at all. Their faces immediately revealed a look of joy, but in the blink of an eye, the dark tide rose again, and completely submerged the sword ray. The darkness rolled like boiling, and outsiders could not feel what was happening inside at all. They could only see that the wind was as sharp as a knife, and it was obvious that in this short period of time, the battle in the dark tide had become extremely intense. Suddenly, someone in the dark tide let out a muffled groan, and then a figure shot up into the night sky like lightning. It was Su Qingjun. Below, the dark aura flashed, and the figure of Lu Chen appeared. His face was covered in dark aura, and there were several wounds on his body, and blood was faintly flowing out. Su Tianhe and Madame Bai were overjoyed, but when they raised their heads and saw Su Qingjun, their smiles froze again. Their daughter was floating in midair, her face pale. She held a sword in one hand, and the other hand was hanging by her side, as if she could not lift it up. This evildoer's cultivation was actually so strong. Why have I not heard of it before? Lu Chen looked at Su Qingjun coldly, and ignored the bleeding wounds on his body, and continued to walk towards Sumo. Madame Bai let out a cry, and Su Tianhe's face instantly became extremely ugly. Madame Bai pulled Sumo's hand, almost cried out, and shouted towards the sky, Little June, quickly save your brother." Su Qingjun stared blankly at the man who was surrounded by darkness, her lips trembled twice. After a moment, she seemed to be smiling bitterly, as if she was grieving, but finally, she still raised the long sword again. That was an ancient celestial sword. The bright moon hanging high in the sky shone down cold moonlight, and at that moment, fell on the edge of her sword. Lu Chen, who was on the ground, seemed to sense something, and suddenly raised his head to look. At that moment, the sky seemed to suddenly darken, and then immediately brightened up. The dimness was because all of the lights suddenly disappeared, all gathered at one point, and then burst forth resplendently on that sword's edge. Taking advantage of this rare full moon night, the cold moonlight, Su Qingjun swung her sword. The elegance of that sword covered the time of heaven and earth. Even the moonlight that filled the sky seemed to follow, turning into sword light, free and easy, falling into the human world, like a lover's last beautiful smile, stretching out a gentle palm, making that last entanglement. Moonlight slash. In the moonlight, cut off all the dust, feelings, life's sufferings, sorrow and loneliness, the entanglement of the past 3 lives. Who was the one who was sad? The loneliness of the light, like the reflection of this life, cut through the darkness, seeing his dark eyes. The black fire roared, rushed up, collided fiercely with the flickering sword light, a loud bang, sand and stones flew, the walls around the entire courtyard collapsed. A moment later, the sword radiance abruptly flourished with unstoppable momentum. It cut through all the black gas and rushed down. Lu Chen dodged to the side and grabbed the blade with his left hand. In an instant, the sharp sword radiance pierced through his palm and arm, leaving a dozen gashes. Light burst out and blood spurted out. He seemed to be completely unaware of it as he expressionlessly extended his other right hand and swatted at Su Qingjun. Su Qingjun was in midair, her bright eyes bright, the sword in her hand changed, the sword light whistled. In an instant it directly pierced through Lu Chen's left arm, and came out. Lu Chen let out a muffled groan, his face finally contorting. At that moment, the sword light was aimed at his heart, but before it pierced, his right palm also carried a sky full of cold wind, the black tide, whistling. In the time it took for a spark to fly off a flint, they were so close that their eyes finally met for a moment. It was a deep, deep gaze. Lu Chen lowered his body. Pooh! The long sword pierced through flesh, from the other side of Lu Chen's shoulder, brought out a cloud of blood, and a ball of black fire danced wildly on Lu Chen's right palm, heavily imprinted on Su Qingjun's chest. A mournful whistling sound, Su Qingjun's entire body flipped and flew out, and then with a pang sound she fell on the ground a zhang away. Her body trembled a few times, with a wah sound she spat out a large mouthful of blood. At the same time, at her chest, the black flame instantly burned into her fair skin and flesh, like the grin of an evil spirit. From then on it lingered. In the tide of darkness, Lu Chen staggered a few steps forward, looked as if he almost fell, but in the end he still held on. But his situation was obviously also very bad. His left hand and shoulder were pierced together by the same sword, forming a ghastly and terrifying appearance. His lips moved, as if he was laughing at himself. Then he glanced at Su Qingjun. Just at that time, that girl was also weakly looking at him from the pool of blood. Neither of them said anything. Lu Chen stretched out his right hand, grabbed the hilt of that ancient sword, and then with a "hoo" sound, he pulled it out. The long sword was clear, and for some reason, seemed not to be stained with blood, only a few beads of blood, slowly dripping from the tip of the sword. Lu Chen took a deep breath, casually threw the ancient sword on the ground, and then continued to walk forward. In front of the courtyard, Sumo seemed to suddenly wake up at this moment, suddenly shouting. For some reason, after coming down from the Kunlun mountain, he seemed to be especially afraid. At this moment when he saw Lu Chen, it was as if he had seen a ghost. His entire body trembled violently, and he couldn't even speak. Su Tianhe and Madame Bai firmly blocked in front of Sumo, ready to fight to the death, as if they were unwilling to give up their child no matter what. But Lu Chen's eyes didn't seem to care about this. The cold and powerful black flame once again ignited, and was about to sweep over. Suddenly, from behind him, came a woman's desperate cry, slightly trembling and crying, "Don't kill my father and mother." Lu Chen's outstretched hand froze in midair. The moonlight fell on his face, only indifference. His hand continued to wave out, a black current surged out, incomparably powerful hit Su Tianhe and Madame Bai, and then in front of him, only Sumo was left. Sumo's whole body trembled, both legs trembled, and his face was full of fear, as if he was extremely afraid, suddenly shouting, "Don't kill me, don't kill me, I am..." Before he could finish speaking, his voice suddenly stopped. A black dagger suddenly appeared from the darkness, and with a trace of cruelty, it directly cut through his throat, causing blood to spurt into the air. Next to him, Madame Bai was just about to rush over like a madman. When she saw this terrifying scene, her whole person was instantly stunned. Then, she screamed at the top of her lungs, and then her eyes rolled back, directly fainting on the ground. Farther away on the ground, Su Qingjun was also stunned. She stared blankly at Sumo's body slowly falling in the splatter of blood. Her whole person's whole face was ashen. After a moment, she spurted out another mouthful of blood. Lu Chen grabbed Sumo's fallen body, stared at his eyes that were about to lose their spirit, and said coldly, "This is for Enchanting." With that said, the black short sword made a whistling sound again, stabbing Sumo's chest 5 times in a row, with blood spurting out from each stab. Finally, his hand raised the knife, chopped off the head, and threw it to the ground. Then, he turned around and walked out. When passing by Su Qingjun, his footsteps slightly slowed, and then he immediately strode away. Finally, darkness, fell on this courtyard again, leaving only a sea of blood. Old Ma stood at the gate, watching Lu Chen slowly walk out, covered in blood, looking at his deformed, abnormally terrifying left hand, and the bloodstains all over his body. He could not help but sigh bitterly, and said bitterly, "Is it really worth it for you to do this?" Lu Chen was silent, slowly walked past him, and came to the dark long street. Enchanting was still lying there, serene and calm. He slowly knelt down beside Enchanting, blood dripping from his body. His whole person looked like a twisted evil spirit and demon. But when he looked at Enchanting, his eyes were gentle, like the naive days of his youth. "It's all right," he said softly to Enchanting, "I have done what should be done." Enchanting was quiet and did not speak. Old Ma showed a bit of pity on his face, and just as he was about to go up and persuade him, his whole body suddenly trembled, and he abruptly looked up into the distance. In the vast and majestic Kunwas city, in the vast wilderness under the moonlight, countless black shadows were attracted by the tide of darkness. They were like gloomy ghosts filled with hatred. And at the top of Mount Kunlun, countless sword lights soared into the sky. They were as bright and dazzling as the rising sun. They flew toward Kunwas city, and in the blink of an eye, the lights and shadows crisscrossed in front of them, surrounding Kunwas city. The moonlight was bleak, and the night was boundless. Old Ma's expression was miserable, and he said to Lu Chen, "What should we do? What should we do?" Lu Chen stood up, looked at the demons and monsters in the distant city, and in the countless dark corners, and suddenly smiled. That smile was as gentle as it had been in the past 10 years, as if it was the original intention of the earliest youth, fearless. He pushed Old Ma away, laughed heartily, and walked forward, towards the long street. Darkness whistled around him, and the moonlight followed his figure, the darkest shadow in the world, rushing forward with large strides, rushing into the seemingly endless darkness. Penetrating the Iron Army until death, a man is a youth. Chapter 243. On the night of the full moon, the famous Kunlun party of the West Continent suddenly experienced a great change. The forbidden Ling Mountain was destroyed, and there was a strange phenomenon in the sky that shook the world. Another evildoer was born and brought disaster to the world. It was said to be an ancient evil creature. However, the Kunlun party was a famous sect with profound strength. They fought bravely and finally eliminated the evil creature, maintaining peace. Unfortunately, the sect elder Hakushin Jinkuan was attacked by the evil creature. Although he suppressed and killed countless evil creatures, he unfortunately became an immortal. The sect leader, Immortal Idol Month, was seriously injured and was forced to retreat to heal. Under the leadership of the sect leader, the head of the Heavenly Soldier Hall, Dukanjinren, and other Yuanying immortals fought against the evil creature. Many people died and were injured. The battle was tragic. They also hated the evildoers of the devil cult who took advantage of the people's precarious situation to create chaos in Kunwa City. They used the evil technique, black fire filled the sky, and countless winged demons bewitched the common people and slaughtered living creatures. Kunlun Pai dispatched elite disciples down the mountain to defeat the remaining evildoers of the devil cult. The bloody battle lasted the whole night. During this time of crisis, the Kunlun party's immortal Tianlan stepped forward and commanded the whole situation. He eliminated the evil creature and the devil cult, calmed people's hearts, and turned the tide. He was respected by the Kunlun party and was elected as the acting sect leader, Immortal Idol Month. Immortal Tianlan was virtuous and indifferent to fame and wealth. He refused to accept the position. People tried to persuade him but to no avail, so they elected the head of the Bai Chao Tang, Immortal Qian Deng, as the acting sect leader. The Kunlun sect united against a common enemy and sent out their elites to fight the devil cult of the three realms at the foot of the Kunlun mountain. In the end, they defeated the evildoers and killed countless devil cult's demons. It was called the Change of the Full Moon. The cold and crazy sword light and countless strange lights flashed inside and outside Kunwa City for a whole night. Countless people's blood stained the yellow soil. Since the battle in the barren valley in the Lost Land 10 years ago, there had not been such a large-scale battle between good and evil. The scene was tragic and bloody. The great battle lasted until daybreak before it slowly stopped. The devil cult's demons gradually retreated. The black fire produced by the strange sorcery in Kunwa City was also nowhere to be seen. It seemed like it had escaped outside the city. On one hand, the Kunlun party settled the people's hearts in the city. On the other hand, they sent people to pursue and suppress the devil cult's demons. They also sent people to the mountain to report to the acting sect leader Qian Dangjinren. They sent their elite fighters to pursue and suppress the devil cult's demons, especially the black fire demons. Thereupon, the Kunlun cultivators searched all over Kunwu. After they found nothing, they learned that the black fire devils had already fled to the south, so they immediately went south in large numbers. Along the way, they encountered many devil cult devils. Both sides fought bloody battles again and again, resulting in heavy casualties. However, in the end, the Kunlun party's people were strong, their horses were strong, and their cultivation was high. The devil cult devils were defeated again and again. Even so, there were still quite a number of devil cult people who were heading south. It seemed like they were also searching for someone. Their urgency was no less than that of the Kunlun party's disciples. At the end of the night of the full moon, Kunwa City was in chaos. The devil cult followers who rushed here in large numbers fought with the Kunlun disciples who went down the mountain in anger. The scene was a mess. Taking advantage of the darkness of the night, Lu Chen restrained his breath. After fighting and struggling several times, he finally escaped from Kunwa City under the cover of the night. However, both the devil cult and the righteous path hated him to the bone. Under the swift and fierce attack, Lu Chen was also seriously injured. It was unknown how many wounds were added to his body. He had to hide here and there all the way to the south. The world was big, but there was no place for him anymore. There were several groups of pursuers chasing behind him, wanting to kill him as soon as possible. Among them, the Kunlun party's cultivation was profound and their power was great. However, the devil cult's pursuers were the fiercest and most ruthless. If it were not for the fact that the good and the evil path could not coexist with each other and they would fight each other when they met by chance, Lu Chen, who was seriously injured, might not have been able to run so far. The sun rose and set, dusk and evening passed. When the sky darkened again, after a whole day and night of pursuit, the pursuers behind Lu Chen gradually decreased. With unbelievable perseverance and all kinds of strange and cunning methods, he rushed into a forest. Borrowing the darkness of the night, he unexpectedly attacked and killed the devil cult master who was the closest to him. At the same time, his body had another wound so deep that his bones could be seen. Then he staggered and fled into the depths of the forest. Behind him, there was still a faint whistling sound of the wind. Perhaps it was more pursuers, an inescapable net with deep killing intent. Lu Chen did not have the energy to care so much. The only thing he could do now was to run as far as possible and hide deeper. As for whether the pursuers behind him were strong or weak, or whether it was the Kunlun party or the devil cult, he could not care anymore. Right now, Lu Chen was already on the verge of collapse. His body was covered with countless wounds, in some places his bones could be seen. His entire body was stained with blood. He did not know how much blood he had lost and how much blood he was stained with. He used the last of his strength to run forward in the forest. At the same time, a bloody hand pressed against his chest, his face showed a trace of anxiety. His injuries were already extremely serious. It would be very difficult for him to continue running. And Lu Chen still had one last way to escape, which was the seed hidden in his heart. However, at such a dangerous time, danger lurked everywhere. At any time, there could be pursuers from both the good and the evil path. It was really not a good time to use the seed. The worst thing was, once he used the seed to hide in the mysterious tree hole, although it looked like he was temporarily safe, in reality, it was equivalent to starting to resign himself to fate. If this method was seen by others, they only needed to pick up the seed and Lu Chen would be doomed eternally. After all, there was no second exit in the mysterious tree hole. And with the Kunlun party and the devil cult's resources and methods, no matter which side the seed fell into, Lu Chen would almost certainly not be able to escape. Lu Chen definitely did not want to experience the feeling of being caught like a turtle in a jar. Moreover, if he did so, it was very likely that this mysterious seed would be exposed. This thing was too important. Once it was recognized by someone, the consequences would be unthinkable. Therefore, it was extremely difficult to escape for his life. Although he was seriously injured, until now, Lu Chen still resisted the urge to use the seed. It was just that at this time, even he himself felt that he was at the end of his rope. His eyes swept across the already darkened mountain forest. The trees were like ghostly shadows. Panting heavily, after walking for so long, he still did not see what he was looking for. Perhaps, that night, everyone's luck was not too good. Lu Chen smiled bitterly in the darkness. Suddenly his legs softened and he staggered, almost fell to the ground. He supported himself on a thick tree trunk and panted for a moment. The hand covering his chest seemed to tighten, but in the end he clenched his teeth and endured it. After looking around, he continued to run forward. Suddenly, a sword light abruptly appeared on the treetop above his head. Immediately following that, a sharp whistle pierced through the silence of the darkness. Like a bolt of lightning, the dazzling brilliance made one speechless. Wherever the sword light passed, the trees split and branches snapped. Leaves flew chaotically. It could be said that its power was unparalleled. Lu Chen gave a low roar. He leapt into the thicket beside him. Right now, he had no more strength to use any kind of resistance. And looking at the power of the sword light, the person's cultivation was not weak. The sword light pierced downwards, but Lu Chen's figure was like a shadow, dodging the attack by a hair's breadth and falling into the dark thicket at the side. Someone in the sword light coldly snorted with some disdain and contempt. The sword light turned, and the sword light was incomparably sharp. It was like an unstoppable wheel of light directly swept across, instantly breaking a row of trees. With a loud crash, the trees fell and grass flew. It was a spectacular scene. But under such power, the darkness did not seem to be moved. It was still silent. Instead, in that chaos, all kinds of fallen trees and messy shadows mixed together. It was like a strange net appeared in the forest. Lu Chen's figure seemed to have disappeared. He was not forced out by that exceptionally sharp sword. The surroundings slowly quietened down. The sword light weakened. A figure appeared. It was a man in his early 30s, dressed in Kunlun clothing. He frowned tightly. He coldly looked around. Suddenly he sneered and said, "Cowardly rat. Only know how to hide." His voice had barely faded away when suddenly a light sound was heard from about a zhang away in front of him on the left side. A dark shadow slightly swept out from the darkness and quickly crouched down. This Kunlun Pai swordsman's eyes lit up. With a shout, his sword gleamed brightly as he dashed forward. As expected, where the sword light shone, the person who was pursuing appeared in the thicket ahead. Blood stains were still on his clothes. The Kunlun disciple's eyes revealed hatred. He was even more merciless. He stabbed down with his sword, wanting to stab through this evil faction sorcerer's heart. The sword edge whizzed through the air, like a hot knife cutting through butter, almost indestructible. It pierced into that person's back. But the Kunlun swordsman's countenance suddenly changed. He felt that something was wrong with the sword. It was as light as a feather. He focused his eyes and saw that under the sword light, the thing that landed on the thicket was only a piece of clothing. He knew that it was not good. He wanted to withdraw and retreat. However, in the dark shadows, suddenly from the shadowy thicket beside him, a black figure leaped up without a sound. A hand had already pressed on the vital point below his ribs. The black fire ignited in a flash. Like a ghost fire that could incinerate the soul, it instantly burned through the flesh. The Kunlun swordsman's body shook greatly. He opened his mouth and roared. However, for some unknown reason, his voice suddenly and strangely disappeared from his mouth. It was as if someone was strangling his throat, choking all his shouts. The black fire burned silently. The person under the fire had already turned into a corpse instead of killing. Lu Chen, who was standing in the darkness, coughed painfully a few times. Pain surged up on his face. At the same time, a complicated emotion flashed past his eyes. This highly skilled person, perhaps he was once his fellow disciple. Perhaps they would be cultivating the way of immortals on Kunlun Mountain together. They would know each other. But on this night, they had become mortal enemies. This life's fate, who could say it clearly? He gritted his teeth and gasped for breath. That simple fight just now had almost exhausted the last of his strength, but he still struggled to move forward. But at this moment, his body suddenly shook. In the dense forest ahead, a faint light suddenly shone. It coldly floated towards him. The murderous aura was cold and sharp. Like an avalanche, it filled this dark night and completely surrounded his figure. Chapter 244. The dense forest was still somewhat damp, most likely the earliest storm last night had ravaged this part of the forest, everywhere was wet. Behind him, the already dead Kunlun disciple was lying in the dirty water. The air began to fill with a strong smell of blood, but it did not come from a dead body. That dim light in the depths of the forest seemed to be slowly approaching. Because the sky was dark, the forest was too dark, and there were many trees blocking the view, so Lu Chen could not see clearly what it was. He could only vaguely see that it was a huge monster, but it did not look like a human, so most likely it was a demon beast. Lu Chen's heart sank. He suddenly thought that during this escape, especially after entering this part of the forest, he did not see a single demon beast. This was obviously not right. And from the sharp breath coming from the front, he was afraid that the demon beast that suddenly appeared was not a good one. Bloodthirsty and violent was unavoidable. Encountering this kind of thing, the best way was of course not to take it head on, not to mention that Lu Chen's current situation was not much different from a lamp that had run out of oil. He was just short of collapsing with one touch. To be honest, with his experience these few days, not to mention ordinary people, even if it was a normal cultivator, not many people would be able to withstand it. Lu Chen tried his best to calm his breathing, and then began to slowly retreat. In the process of retreating, he did not even dare to turn his back to the dim light in the dense forest, because his past experience had long made him know that if he still showed his back when encountering a powerful demon beast, it was equivalent to shouting to the demon beast to quickly come and eat him. It was just that in these few days, his luck seemed to be extremely bad. He had only retreated 3 or 4 steps when suddenly a gust of cold wind came from the forest behind him. Lu Chen's expression changed. He looked back and saw that in the forest, 2 figures slowly appeared. Both were dressed in black from head to toe, their faces were covered with a black cloth. One was holding a long sword, the other was holding a strange weapon like a flying ring. Looking at their attire, coupled with their undisguised murderous aura, as well as the deep-seated hatred in their eyes, it was 100 times stronger than the Kunlun disciple. They were obviously from the 3 Realms demonic sect. Lu Chen sighed. After hesitating for a moment, he still slowly turned around, facing the 2 demonic sect disciples, giving his back to the mysterious demon beast in the forest. Sometimes, humans were actually much more terrifying than demon beasts. Traitor! An angry roar filled with disdain and hatred came from the masked man in black. The 2 men did not have the slightest thought of tolerating Lu Chen's breathing or understanding that he was seriously injured and at the end of his rope. Without hesitation, they launched an attack. Their weapons flashed with a cold light as they fiercely slashed at Lu Chen. It looked like they wanted to immediately cut Lu Chen into pieces. The sword wielder charged straight into the middle of the door, while the person holding the strange flying ring weapon suddenly split into 2 in midair after activating his weapon. He split into 2 and circled around to both sides, actually forming a pincer attack with the other person. The killing situation was set in an instant. Without the slightest thought of tolerating Lu Chen's mercy, Lu Chen's breathing became heavier, his eyes cold. Suddenly the veins on his neck bulged, his entire body looked as if it was about to collapse in the wind. Without knowing where the strength came from, he suddenly shot forward, completely disregarding the 2 flying rings flashing with cold light behind him, directly pouncing towards the sword-wielding man in black. That man in black seemed to be taken aback, but he had no intention of retreating. Instead he gave a hideous laugh. The sword in his hand became even more intense, directly chopping over. Anyone could see that right now, Lu Chen's entire body was covered in injuries. The situation was terrible. Right now it was just a deathbed struggle. Lu Chen's hurried leap caused him to temporarily pull some distance away from the flying rings behind him. However, the swift and fierce sword light in front of him abruptly closed in. In an instant, it was already right in front of him. Lu Chen's pupils even reflected the shadow of the sword light, but it suddenly disappeared right after. Because all the light in his eyes was suddenly swallowed up by a ball of dark flames. The black flame ignited. Although it was already somewhat dim, the murderous aura did not weaken in the slightest. Darkness surged around Lu Chen, causing his figure to seem to blur for a moment in the time it took for a spark to fly off a flint. Pooh! A muffled sound, just as the sword light chopped in front of Lu Chen, the darkness still silently surged over the blade, flipped over the sword hilt, and wrapped around that black-clothed man's palm. Ah! The black-clothed man who had been brimming with killing intent suddenly howled loudly, as if he had suffered unimaginable pain in that instant. Even his voice was so sharp that it seemed to have deformed, causing the other black-clothed man not far away to jump in fright. The black flames burned on his hand, directly burning into the flesh. The long sword fell to the ground with a bang sound. An icy but familiar cold energy gathered from his wrist, once again merging into Lu Chen's dantian. As if bitten by the world's most terrifying venomous snake, that black-clothed man fell to the ground and began to struggle with all his might, but at this time the 2 flying rings were already chasing after him again. Lu Chen's body swayed, as if he wanted to dodge, but his body staggered, unexpectedly not dodging. Pu sound, the 2 flying rings directly pierced into his back. Lu Chen's vision darkened, and he could no longer support himself. Staggering forward a few steps, his legs softened, and he knelt on the ground, using his hands to support himself, as if he wanted to force himself to stand up again, but no matter how hard he tried, he did not have the strength to support his body. Instead, he forced his body several times, causing several wounds to open up, and blood flowed out. But the blood was not too much, not because the wounds were not deep enough, but because he had already lost too much blood. Finally, there was still no way out. Lu Chen only felt that his vision darkened, his entire body felt like it was about to fall apart, and the remaining traces of strength were quickly dissipating, and everything that he saw at this moment, the night, the forest, the trees, the shadows, the black-clothed, and that strange dim light, suddenly blurred and began to spin. All the sounds seemed to be fading away, the pain was like a tide from every corner of his body, making him feel like he was in the terrifying purgatory of the 9 netherworlds. This was a pain that was enough to make an ordinary person collapse in an instant, but Lu Chen felt a strange sense of familiarity. In the past 10 years, every time the black fire curse flared up, and the black flames burned his body, he would be immersed in this terrible pain, unable to extricate himself. Now, because he was about to die, was the black fire finally beginning to bite back? The black-clothed man with the flying rings glanced at his comrade who was obviously already twitching on the ground, and fiercely rushed up to kick Lu Chen. Lu Chen fell to the ground with a bang, dirty and wet soil splashing on his face. The black-clothed man cursed, his eyes revealing a fierce light, and with a wave of his hands, the 2 flying rings flew out of his body and back into his hands, bringing with it a flower of blood. At this moment, Lu Chen didn't even seem to have the strength to struggle, only moving his body slightly. The black-clothed man walked forward, and without saying a word, he swiped at Lu Chen's throat. It seemed that he didn't want to drag things out any longer, and wanted to kill directly for revenge. But at this moment, the forest suddenly darkened. The black-clothed man's hand subconsciously slowed, only to see a shadow suddenly surge from the front, flying into the air, filled with murderous intent, especially an unimaginably thick smell of blood. In the darkness, 2 dark green and cold lights swept past, like eerie but transparent gems, and also like the coldest ghost fire in the depths of the yellow springs, surging forward. The name of a huge monster blocked the black-clothed man's vision, leaving him with only darkness. The black-clothed man screamed, his heart was torn apart, but in front of such a terrifying beast, and a sudden sneak attack, he even lost the strength to fight back, and could only subconsciously reach out to cover his head. A fishy wind swept past, and the black-clothed man's body trembled, his whole body cold, but in the next moment, he suddenly froze, only to find that he didn't seem to be injured. Looking up, he saw that the incomparably ferocious and terrifying monster that pounced from the darkness, that momentum like a mountain, actually pounced on empty air. In the dark mountain forest, a huge demonic beast appeared. It was shaped like a wolf, and its body was completely black. Its 2 huge eyes flickered with a cold and dark green light. It looked like a demonic wolf that had walked out from hell. But just now, that seemingly thunderous and murderous attack, this black wolf did not know why, after falling, it actually pounced a foot away from the black-clothed man, pouncing on empty air. The black wolf beast seemed to be a bit stunned. After a moment, it suddenly roared, looking a bit angry. Its 2 eyes shone with green light. It turned around and slapped the black-clothed man with its claws. Immediately, the black-clothed man's blood spurted out. Before he could react, the ferocious and terrifying beast had already pounced on him and knocked him to the ground. Then with a terrible roar and the sound of flesh tearing, the black-clothed man screamed a few times, and then there was no more sound. In the air of the forest, there was a bit of a bloody smell. Everything slowly quieted down. The black wolf stared at the dead man on the ground a few times, then turned around and walked to the side of Lu Chen, its 2 eyes flashing with cold light. A terrible wolf mouth that was still dripping blood came over, as if it wanted to make a move on Lu Chen. Lu Chen's body moved a bit, then slowly turned over, still lying on the ground powerlessly. Facing the sky, he gasped for breath. The terrible wolf face appeared in his line of sight, especially the pair of snow-white sharp fangs that protruded out of the mouth, seemed to be colder and sharper than all the blades in this world. Lu Chen quietly looked at this black wolf, suddenly laughed. His laughter was not loud. When he laughed, it also seemed to be very painful, but in his laughter, there was a trace of warmth and gratification, mixed with a little pain. It was like in this dark and cold night, he finally came into contact with a trace of warm light. Lu Chen coughed, with a trace of pain, but he smiled at this fierce monster and said, "Hey, stupid dog, I saw your stupid look just now." Ho! The black wolf monster roared, bared its teeth, and its hair stood up. It seemed to be instantly enraged, wanting to bite this man's throat in one bite. Chapter 245. Black Wolf stared fiercely at the man who looked like he was about to die. He bared his fangs, as if he was considering whether he should bite off this fellow's neck and silence him. Lu Chen was still smiling. He barely raised his right hand and patted Black Wolf's face. "Let's go. I don't know how many pursuers are behind us." Hei Lang growled in a low voice. He still looked a little dissatisfied, but his eyes quickly softened. The original coldness was gone, replaced by a hint of concern and anxiety. It lowered its huge head and extended it to Lu Chen's side, as if it wanted to push him up. However, Lu Chen struggled twice but was still unable to get up. Seeing that Lu Chen seemed to be at the end of his rope, Black Wolf panicked. He whimpered and used his head to gently nudge Lu Chen's body. Then, he lay down beside him, probably urging him to climb onto his back. Lu Chen lay sprawled on the ground, panting heavily. His face was frighteningly pale. He looked like an exhausted dead dog. Black Wolf waited for a while. Seeing that Lu Chen was still motionless, he could not help but let out a low growl. After hesitating for a moment, Black Dragon suddenly stood up and bit towards Lu Chen. He bit the upper part of Lu Chen's arm and suddenly flung it. With a whoosh, a huge force came over. Lu Chen's entire body was involuntarily flung up. At the same time, several wounds on his body burst open again, causing Lu Chen to let out a muffled groan. The muscles on his face twisted, and in the next moment, his entire body was lying on Black Wolf's broad back. The soft but tough black fur carried a trace of warmth. In this cold night, there was a reassuring warmth. Black Wolf looked back at him, as if he was worried. Lu Chen panted for a moment. Even though there was blood at the corner of his mouth, he still laughed softly and said, "Well done. You can go now." The Black Wolf growled in a low voice before turning around and walking away. The forest in front of him was deep, and the shadows of the mountains were heavy in the distance. It had only taken 2 steps when Lu Chen, who was on its back, suddenly whispered, "Don't go back. Kunlun Mountain can no longer accommodate us." Hei Lang's footsteps came to a halt. Its eyes were filled with doubt, but it did not question Lu Chen's words. However, it still howled at the majestic mountain in the distance, as if it was pointing at something. Lu Chen suddenly became silent. He lay on Black Wolf's back, his head buried deep, his hands hanging weakly by Black Wolf's side. There was a hint of indifference in the air. Black Wolf seemed to be a little uneasy, and kept turning his head to look at Lu Chen. After a while, Lu Chen said in a low voice, "There's no need to look for Exian, she dead." Roar! A terrifying howl suddenly burst forth from the Black Wolf's mouth. A dark green and cold flame instantly appeared in its huge eyes that had recovered. It was like a burning flame. It suddenly raised its head and stared at the deep night and the distant mountain in front of it. Killing intent was like a tide, emanating from the giant beast, as if it wanted to tear everything in front of it to shreds. It suddenly took a step forward, as if it was about to rush into the darkness in the distance. A hand covered in blood gently blocked its path. A moment later, Lu Chen's voice sounded in Black Wolf's ears. It seemed to carry a trace of calmness. "There's no need to go. I've already avenged her." Hei Lang's front foot paused in midair, and after a while, it slowly retracted it. It turned its huge wolf head and stared at Lu Chen with its terrifying green and murderous eyes. Lu Chen had no intention of avoiding it, and only nodded lightly at the giant wolf. The dark green flame slowly calmed down and was replaced by an indescribable deep sorrow. The huge black wolf was silent. It stood where it was for a long time. It was as if many scenes from the past flashed past its eyes. In the valley of the land of chaos, there was a girl who was smiling like a flower. She hugged it and pouted her lips carefully. Her warm embrace, her kind smile, and her long-winded nagging. She was always smiling, she was always gentle, and she was always a little stupid. Even when they broke up, she would go the wrong way, but the night was so cold, the world was so cruel, and when the lives that should have died finally struggled to survive in her hands, the light fell on their hearts. Hei Lang carried Lu Chen on its back, slowly turned around, and walked in another direction, towards the south where its back was facing the tall mountain. The mountain forest was silent, and darkness and silence shrouded the surroundings. Lu Chen silently lay on its back, one man and one wolf, gradually walking away. But, just as they were about to walk into the darkness, suddenly, that black wolf turned around, its huge eyes wide open, staring at the dark world, and let out an incomparably mournful howl. The howl spread far away, reverberating between the heaven and earth, reverberating in the night wind, and gradually fading away, as if it was a memory of the past. Then, they finally walked into the darkness, disappearing into the distance. On the majestic Kunlun mountain, it was now deep in the night. On the heavenly Kun peak, in the solemn and majestic Xingyang Hall, Daoist Qian Deng finished his last task, and stood up from the spacious main seat. The chair was extremely spacious and looked very imposing. The wood used to make it was the extremely rare, blood-wing sandalwood. It was a 4-vein top-grade spirit wood and was priceless. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that it was one of the most precious chairs in the world. Only a famous sect like the Kunlun party, which had been passed down for 5,000 years and had never been severed, could possibly have such a profound heritage and such a treasure. As the highly respected Yuanying spiritual master of the Kunlun party, Daoist Qian Deng naturally knew the origin of this blood-winged sandalwood throne, and also knew that in the long years of the past, only the spiritual masters of the Kunlun party had the qualifications to sit on this chair. He had wanted to sit on this chair for a very, very long time. But today, when he really sat on it, he didn't feel particularly comfortable. The chair seemed a bit too hard. Although the blood-winged sandalwood was a top-grade spiritual wood, and could nourish spiritual power and calm the mind, this kind of spiritual wood naturally carried a different kind of strange smell. It wasn't a fishy smell, but a very strange smell. Some people liked it, and some people hated it. Daoist Qian Deng didn't like this smell, so he didn't like this chair either. But he liked the feeling of sitting on this chair very much. So when he stood up, he couldn't help but gently stroke the armrest next to him. He then revealed a satisfied smile, turned around, and walked into the rear hall of Xingyang Hall. Although the night was dark, the side hall behind Xingyang Hall was still brightly lit. But at this time, the many revered Yuanying spiritual masters that gathered in the hall had all disappeared. When Daoist Qian Deng walked into the hall, he only saw 2 people. One was the bald fatty true Lord Tianlan, who was sitting in the seat of honor, and the other was Zhuo Xian, who was standing respectfully to his side. Daoist Qian Deng glanced at Zhuo Xian indifferently with a hint of disdain in his eyes, but it quickly disappeared and was replaced with a respectful and warm expression. He walked up to true Lord Tianlan and bowed, saying, "Uncle Master, I've come." True Lord Tianlan opened his eyes and looked at Daoist Qian Deng. He smiled and said, "Qian Deng, you've come. Sit down and talk." "Yes." Daoist Qian Deng thanked him and immediately sat down on the left side of true Lord Tianlan. This chair gave him a very familiar and comfortable feeling, especially when compared to the blood-winged sandalwood throne from before. This chair had been placed in this hall for many years, and he had also sat on it for many years. It had always been a position above everyone else and below only one person. For some reason, when he sat here tonight, there was a strange feeling in his heart. It was as if he felt that something was different from before. This subtle emotion flashed through Daoist Master Qian Deng's mind, but he didn't show it on his face. At the same time, Daoist Master Tianlan's voice sounded in his ears. "Have you finished dealing with the matters outside?" Daoist Qian Deng bowed slightly and nodded. "Yes, the sect is now stable. Many disciples are in their positions and there is nothing out of the ordinary." Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded. Qiandang, you've contributed greatly to the stable situation after the Great Change. Daoist Qiandang smiled. It's all thanks to you, Uncle Master, that our Kunlun sect is able to remain calm in the face of danger. True Lord Tianlan pondered for a moment and then asked, how is Idle Month? Daoist Qiandang paused for a moment and subconsciously glanced at Zhuoxian, who was standing on the opposite side. At this moment, Zhuoxian happened to look at him as well, as if this question had touched him. Their gazes met in the air for a moment and then moved away. Daoist Qiandang respectfully said to True Lord Tianlan, Senior Brother Sect Master is seriously injured and can't handle matters. For the sake of his cultivation and longevity, he had no choice but to go into seclusion in his cave abode. I'm afraid he won't be able to come out for the next 10 years. Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded before sighing all of a sudden. Junior Nisian Yu is my senior brother's favorite disciple and he had high hopes for her. It's a pity that she didn't want to meet with such a calamity. Daoist Qiandang and Zhuoxian both looked down at the ground and didn't reply. After a moment, True Lord Tianlan said to Daoist Qiandang, you've been busy for the whole day. Go and rest. I'm afraid you'll be busy for the next few days. Thank you for your hard work. Daoist Qiandang hurriedly stood up and said, Uncle Master, you flatter me. This is what I should do. In fact, I'm not very capable. Ever since I was appointed as the acting sect master, I've always been afraid that I won't be able to do my job well and let down the ancestors and Uncle Master's trust. In fact, if Uncle Master is free, on behalf of the 100,000 disciples in the sect, Qiandang earnestly asks Uncle Master Qiandang to take this position. Our Kunlun sect will be able to rise again and regain the glory of our ancestors. Zhuoxian frowned slightly and glanced at Daoist Qiandang. True Lord Tianlan was silent for a moment and then revealed a faint smile. He looked at Daoist Qiandang and said, Are you serious? Daoist Qiandang's heart suddenly skipped a beat and a chill appeared in his body. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.